Chapter 210. Duque agreed. Even though he still needed bandits in the future, they would need to be powerful ones. Van Cleef was definitely not up to the task. There were many things he needed to make in the following days, but there was nothing that required Van Cleef's skills. Those who truly needed Van Cleef's skills would have to wait until Stormwind City was rebuilt. Duque had always believed that talent should not be wasted. The two were overjoyed to see Duque agree. They looked at Duque expectantly, waiting to see how much support Duque would give them. Duque cleared his throat. I cannot go against His Majesty's orders. So, Garion, you must give up your position as sheriff and become the commander of my private army. No problem. Garion was willing to do anything for the people of the Westfall Wilderness. Edwin, you're still new in this field, so you'll be Garion's assistant. Understand? Understood, master. Edwin nodded. Duque pressed his hands on the table and put on a serious expression. As a form of support for your work behind the enemy lines, I'll allow you to recruit 3,000 experienced volunteers in South Shore in my name. I'll pay each of them 2 gold coins in advance. Remember, you are not allowed to recruit soldiers from the Stormwind Army. If Duque had done this before the Dark Portal incident, he would have been asking for trouble. But now it was completely different. Among the 50,000 elite soldiers who had withdrawn from Stormwind City, less than half of them were active soldiers. The rest were the private soldiers of various nobles, militia, and even warriors who were born as ordinary citizens. They had experienced the orcs in the past, so they were definitely experts. Both of them heaved a sigh of relief at Duque's words. This was a great support. I can also transfer 3 Bloodsail warships to you as your personal supply ships. But remember, I don't want you to launch too many attacks against the orcs in the first 3 months. You'll be courting death before the orcs' main force invades the northern continent. Duque opened the map and pointed at Moon Creek Town in the western wilderness. I know there's a Moon Creek mine here. And I knew that in the deepest part of the mine, there was a huge hole in the sea that could be used as a secret dock. Therefore, I hope that you will use Moon Creek Town as your base and turn the Moon Creek mine into the Beastman's Death Mine. I said it, I really said it. Looking at Van Cleef and Stallman's worshipful gazes, Duke's heart was filled with joy. I can't believe I taught the boss of the death mines in the history to go to the death mines and trap the orcs. I'm such a genius. Duque laughed in his heart. He laughed proudly and wantonly. Van Cleef, on the other hand, had a look of realization on his face. So when we first mentioned going to the Western Wilderness, you reacted so strongly because you actually had the same idea, but we both had the same idea? That's right. Duque acted as if he and Van Cleef had a tacit understanding. What else could Duque say in the face of Van Cleef's perfect imagination? Of course he could only say, yes. You're absolutely right. Van Cleef was indeed very happy. After Duque let them leave, Van Cleef returned as soon as he left. Master. What is it? Duque poked his head out from the mountain of documents and requests. Van Cleef was a little bashful. It's like this. Master, you don't seem to have any servants or maids. This doesn't match your status at all, Duque replied calmly. If you say it matches your status, then please take a look at the Queen's and Prince William's palaces. Van Cleef immediately understood what Duque meant. Master, it's actually about my daughter, Vanessa. I'm going to the Western Wilderness now, and I'm afraid it's not safe for me to bring her along. So I was wondering if I could let her be a maid here. When Van Cleef mentioned Vanessa, Duque was stunned. He couldn't help but think of Vanessa Van Cleef in the history. A young girl who had witnessed her father's tragic death with her own eyes. She tried her best to escape capture and survive. When she grew up, she devoted herself to restoring and rebuilding everything that her father had fought for. This sounded like a hero's coming-of-age story, didn't it? Most people would think so, but in this tragic story, the villains were the nobles of Stormwind, including the widely acknowledged wise and great King William. The cause was also the conspiracy of the Princess of the Black Dragons, Onyxia. She tricked Van Cleef and then in turn tricked Stormwind. Van Cleef's Mason Guild rebuilt Stormwind, and instigated the nobles of Stormwind not to pay the Mason Brotherhood a single coin's wages. This directly led to the Brotherhood's riots and demonstrations, and during the demonstrations a stone thrown by a Mason killed Queen Tiffany of William's queen. This was a tragedy of an official forcing the people to rebel, and a tragedy created by evil forces. Vanessa Van Cleef's most famous words were, "Hope? Is that how I should feel when I watch you lackeys of the nobles chop off my father's head? To me, hope is just a vicious joke in this cruel world. There is no hope. There is only Vanessa." Thinking of the tragic father-daughter duo Van Cleef, Duque couldn't help but feel a little warmth in his heart. Let her come. As long as I'm not dead, I won't let her come to harm. Edwin came with his daughter, Vanessa. One. Although Duque really wanted to use this adjective to describe Vanessa, it was obvious that it wouldn't work. According to Edwin, Vanessa was only 13 years old, but she was so well-bred. Duque's dog eyes were about to go blind. Vanessa was about 170 meters tall and had a head of black hair that reached her ears. She wasn't as beautiful as Aurelia, but she still had 80 points. The sturdy dumpling was at least a C-cup. Beneath the linen shorts was a pair of long white legs. Note that she was only 13 years old and still had room to grow. According to the trend of history, she definitely wouldn't be disabled. Duque coughed. "From now on, I'm your master." "Yes, Master Marcus." The little girl called out reluctantly, her eyes red as if Duque had forced his father to sell her here. Duque was embarrassed. "Just help clean the room and then learn more combat skills. I don't need a pure maid. Okay, you can go now." "Yes." The little girl left, and before she left, she gave her father an extremely aggrieved look. "All right, Edwin, come back once every 3 months to report on your work. Also, remember that your master is from MI7. Don't get too close to him." Chapter 211. Duque still had a lot of things to do. The scouts sent back news. The Horde chief's flag had been replaced with a black hammer, and the dark portal had been opened again. This meant that Orgrim was still the Horde chief, just like in history. Duque felt that it was a pity. He had already hated Orgrim to this extent, but Orgrim still managed to become the Horde chief. He didn't know if he should sigh at how strong the inertia of history was, or that a true hero would always be the most dazzling existence no matter what. Duque was worried about his own butterfly effect. The Horde's attack on Stormwind City had expended an unexpected amount of manpower. Without the help of Mediv, which was controlled by Sargeras, the transportation capacity of the Dark Portal was greatly reduced. It would be good if it could only carry a third of what it used to. The Horde could still continuously transport Orc warriors from Draenor. But Duque knew that the warriors that came later were not as strong as the hundreds of thousands of elites that came first. The first batch were either veterans who had gone through the war with the Draenei, or warriors who had proven their strength in cruel hunts. If the Orc elites before the Dark Portal were 10, then the later batch would only be around 7. And Duque's target was the Blackrock tribe, which made it easier for Orgrim to command the Horde. One could imagine that Gul'dan, a despicable and powerful warlock, would provide more powerful warriors for Orgrim in order to save his own life. The Horde acted as they did in history, but the negotiations between the human countries had reached a stalemate. Duque knew that only when the 7 human kingdoms united, along with the dwarves, pygmies and high elves, would they be able to form the first alliance in the world of Azeroth. The problem was that the alliance that should have been established had not made any progress. According to Lothar's message, Duque knew what had happened. Now the kings and high nobles of many countries, including King Tyreenas of Lordaeron, all thought that Lang was just a useless person who couldn't even defend his own country, after being chased away by a troll-like monster. At the end of the day, the root of the problem was Duke the Butterfly. In history, Lang had died, and Lothar had come to the Rotterdam kingdom with a pitiful number of guards and the little prince. Lothar plays the role of a tragic hero. Why were the other 6 human kingdoms willing to elect Lothar as the commander of the alliance? Firstly, it was because of the threat of the tribe. Secondly, it was because of Lothar's noble bloodline. In history, Lothar had acknowledged the human kings as kings in the name of the last son of Sorodin the Great, in exchange for a political union. Thirdly, Stormwind in history had no military strength at all. It was just an empty shell. The countries were most at ease handing their soldiers over to Lothar. At this moment, only Stormwind and the Dwarven Kingdom in the south of the Eastern Kingdom were under attack. The northern continent was still as peaceful as ever, as if nothing had happened. Lothar did not play the card of Thoradin the Great either. The most important thing was that Lang had 50,000 elites under his command. Who would listen to whom after they united became a major problem. After all, the split of the Arathar Empire was ultimately due to different ideologies, and no one was willing to submit to the other. Duque was a little anxious. As a transmigrator, he definitely knew which two cards the tribe would play next. The first card was the trolls. They were tall and terrifying humanoid creatures that were thinner than orcs and had two long fangs. They were native to planet Azeroth. As early as 14,000 years ago, the trolls were the rulers of this planet. The trolls had established many large countries, among which the Amani Empire and the Gurubashi Empire had the largest territories. Both empires were ruled by the Zendala tribe, so they were also praised as the Zendala Empire. Even the famous Night Elves were a group of humanoid creatures from the Dark Troll tribe that migrated to the Well of Eternity. They gradually evolved under the influence of the Well's arcane energy. More than 1,000 years ago, it was precisely because of the rise of the human race that the great demons, who had already been split into countless clans, were chased away from the most fertile lands and chased into the barren lands deep in the mountains. The hatred of the trolls towards the humans and the high elves was definitely off the charts. When the orc tribe arrived, they would definitely hit it off. The second card was the forbidden evil existence, the Death Knight. Duque shuddered at the thought of how powerful and terrifying the Death Knight was. After thinking about it, Duque decided to personally promote the establishment of the alliance. The 25th of September was no different from any other day after King Turinas of Lordaeron gathered the representatives of the various countries. Endless wrangling, endless sarcasm and ridicule. Among the 9 big shots, other than Lang and Turinas who were kings, the other 5 human kingdoms sent dukes. The dwarves sent a brigadier general and the high elves only sent a substitute counselor. It was these guys who were not even as high as Lang who dared to spit at Lang. What orc rampage. They're just a bunch of troll-like beasts. I didn't expect that the son of Thoradin the Great, who chased away the trolls and made the humans rise, couldn't even defeat a bunch of troll-like guys, and had to run around the sea to escape. It was a duke of the Gilnea's kingdom who spoke. You. If it wasn't for the fact that killing this guy would cause a serious international dispute, Lothar almost wanted to smash his white glove on the guy's face. In the end, isn't it all because of your guardian, Mediv? If it wasn't for Mediva's betrayal, would there have been an orc invasion after the dark portal was opened? Would there have been so many problems? Why do the entire human world have to clean up the mess you caused? The representative of the Alterac kingdom followed suit. Enough. Don't you dare insult Mediv. It's obviously the demon king Sargera's plot. If you continue to insult him, I don't mind challenging you to a duel as Mediva's best friend. This time even King Lang couldn't take it anymore. As a childhood friend of Lang, Mediva's character was definitely noble. After knowing the truth, Lang also tried his best to protect the reputation of his childhood friend. Even after Mediva's death, Lang continued to work hard for this. Now that this guy had publicly slapped Mediva's face, wasn't this also slapping Lang's face? Since Lang was so tough, that guy finally kept quiet. But there was still no progress in the meeting. At this time, a young mage who had just appeared beside Lang that day, and was ignored by the representatives of the various kingdoms, had a mysterious smile on his face. Chapter 212. 1,000 years of peace had brought about many things. For example, prosperity and numbness. The bustling life in the city made everyone like flowers in a greenhouse that could not withstand any wind and rain. Once a gust of wind called orcs broke the glass window of the greenhouse, they would wither or even wither. In the history, even if Lothar made a shocking concession and sacrificed the glory of his ancestors, he personally admitted that the era of great Emperor Thoradin was over, and he acknowledged the royal authority of the kings. It still took more than 3 months to complete the integration of the alliance. It was only after the orcs bypassed the Stormguard Kingdom's Sodder Bridge defense line and invaded the hinterland of the various kingdoms in the northern continent from the sea that the kingdoms came to their senses. Note that the kingdoms here did not include the Rotterdam Kingdom. The Rotterdam Kingdom, which had the strongest economic and military strength, was almost the last to be attacked because of its geographical location in the north. For a long time, the Rotterdam Kingdom was in a state of local war. They would just spend some money in troops and then it would not affect them. The nobles sang and danced and watched the beasts fight. When the battle at the front line was at its most intense, The bastard nobles even went to the Tarina's kingdom every day to complain that Lothar was a vampire, which consumed too much of their taxes and manpower. What Duque wanted to do was to awaken the lion. Even if it was old, it was still a lion. Lang and Andoin glanced at Duque. They did not know what Duque was up to, but Duque must have done something. It was because Duque had said that he would use a new method to stimulate a certain king's nerves. What the hell was this new method? Lang and Andoin felt that something was amiss as soon as they heard it. However, they still acquiesced to Duque after the negotiations were not going anywhere. The representatives of the various kingdoms did not stop criticizing the Stormwind. The representative of the Gilnea's kingdom pointed at the head of the frozen chief, Blackhand, and mocked King Lang. You said this is the head of the chief of those green-skinned monsters? Maybe this guy is a little big, but who can prove that this is their leader? Didn't you say that they were all intelligent monsters? Why would their leader come to you and let you chop off his head? Stop joking, no king would easily stand at the front lines. Why would the beastmen who clearly have the upper hand send a great chieftain for you to kill? You. Noxus was enraged. He had risked his life to kill Blackhand. Now it was actually reduced to worthless. Duke, however, stopped Lothar and turned to the representative of Gilneas with a smile. How about this? The army of our Stormwind Kingdom will go to the battlefield at the same time as your army. You can take this big head and shake it in front of the tribe. Let's see who the green-skinned creatures will chase. You. Gilneas' representative suddenly stood up, wanting to ridicule Duque, but at this time something happened. Just yesterday, before Duque and his entourage arrived at Lordaeron City, an unfamiliar slave trader presented a batch of special gifts to Menethil II and requested an audience with the king. Everyone knew that the king of Lordaeron would not simply meet with a slave trader who came out of nowhere. If it wasn't for the fact that the slave trader's gifts were good enough, even a person of status would not have appeared. In the end, it was a Viscount of Lordaeron who received the slave trader. The merchant repeatedly told the Viscount who met him that this batch of goods needed to be injected with a tranquilizer made from the peace bloom, as the main medicine every 12 hours. Otherwise, the existing restraints and cages would not be able to hold them. The slave trader even sent a formal notice in the form of a document through formal diplomatic channels. This slave trader was obviously someone's subordinate. However, as someone expected, the slave trader's reasonable request was ignored, and all of the slave trader's warnings were ignored. This was the arrogance of Lordaeron, the most powerful of the 7 kingdoms. Arrogance was also a common problem among the nobles of Lordaeron. More than 1,000 years ago, it was the ancestors of these arrogant nobles who transferred their property to the more prosperous Lordaeron region, leaving the descendants of Thoradin the Great to die in the ruined Rapidstream Castle. No one would have thought that more than 1,000 years later, they would also pay a terrible price for their arrogance. After this point in time, the Lordaeron kingdom would perish because of the arrogance and stubbornness of King Tarina's. Duque had no intention of stopping this, but the Lordaeron kingdom was still extremely powerful at this point in time, and Duque did not mind using the arrogance of the people of Lordaeron to make them suffer a little. Dang dang dang. The alarm that symbolized the invasion of foreign enemies had not sounded for 1,000 years in this pure white city that was also regarded as a holy city by countless people. When the loud and shrill alarm rang, no one in the entire Lordaeron kingdom reacted. Almost everyone was stunned for more than 3 seconds. Only the most dutiful guards realized after a few seconds that it was AF** King alarm. All of a sudden the entire Lordaeron was in an uproar. The representative of Gilneas, who was about to scold them, was stunned. As the leader of this place, Menethil II, who thought that he was the noblest among the 7 kings, could not help but be furious. His white beard flared up and he stared at his servant with his old eyes. Quickly go and find out what happened. Why did you sound the alarm? The trouble was at the arena. In this era of lack of entertainment, bloody and exciting gladiatorial competitions were the most attractive entertainment, second to none. There were countless gladiatorial arenas of all sizes in the entire northern continent. Just like Thrall, who was the son of the chief of the Frostwolf clan, Durotan, Thrall was picked up by a human after Durotan was assassinated by the assassins of the Shadow Council. After that, Thrall was raised as a slave gladiator for a long time. On the surface, the entire Lordaeron kingdom did not care about the invasion of the orcs. In fact, the slave gladiators of the orcs were definitely in high demand and were the most popular goods in the Lordaeron kingdom. A healthy orc slave warrior could be sold for more than 10,000 gold coins recently. Be it the nobles of the Lordaeron kingdom or the black-hearted owners of the gladiatorial arenas, none of them could resist this temptation. There were 100 orcs, and they were all elites of the Blackstone clan. There were even a few personal guards of Black Hand. In order to collect these orcs, someone had put in a lot of effort. After the effects of the mind-calming potion on the orcs wore off, they heard a voice. It was in the orc language. This voice told them that the head of their chief was in the highest castle, and it was being wantonly humiliated and displayed by the humans. Revenge. 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 Driven by their frenzied thoughts, the orcs easily broke free from the iron shackles that were as thick as a human baby's arm, broke the iron bars of the cage and charged out. Chapter 213. Impossible. The managers of the Colosseum who dealt with ferocious monsters all day long, and the guards responsible for watching over the slaves, were all stunned. The humanoid monster in front of him was beyond the scope of human imagination. Despite the mysterious merchant's repeated warnings, the guards saw the burly bodies of these orcs and still imprisoned them according to the standards of the trolls. In their opinion, even two giant demons wouldn't be able to break free. They were wrong. Beastmen were already stronger than trolls, let alone berserk beastmen who had drunk demon blood. Following a roar that shook the entire arena, 100 berserk beastmen broke free of their cages and charged towards the light. Each and every one of these men, who would definitely be strong and powerful compared to humans, were like children in front of them. The long whips used to punish the slaves would only make them more ferocious. The gigantic fist smashed into the faces of the scarred and ferocious-looking guards, and the abundant power easily smashed everything it came into contact with. His cheekbones instantly collapsed, followed by his temples and lower jaw, and then his entire skull collapsed. Before the human cervical vertebrae could support or cushion the impact, the violent force had already shattered the entire skull. Yellow, white, red, all sorts of colors dyed the walls of the Colosseum, which must have been dyed black with the blood of countless slaves, into the colors of the abusers. More guards heard the news and rushed over. They brought the best equipment they could. However, it was useless. These berserk orcs could set off a bloody storm with just a punch or a swing of their arms. By the time the orcs came back to their senses, there was no one alive in the basement except for the orcs. The inexplicable voice seemed to be guiding them, and they seemed to feel the unyielding anger of the great chief, Black Hand, roaring. Loknarash, the leader of the Black Hand guards, shouted, ordering the orcs to arm themselves. They quickly gathered all the heavy weapons they could find, smashed open the door of the arena, and saw light. Lokdroger. He would rather die than win. In this unknown country filled with humans, in this place where enemies were everywhere, the glory of the tribe and the violent demon blood in their bodies drove them to charge towards the tallest and most magnificent building. The city guards were alerted. They rushed over upon hearing the news and saw a group of peerless monsters with green skin. Don't be afraid. These were orcs. Get into formation and surround him. Before the squad leader could finish shouting, a huge iron pillar that was thicker than a man's thigh had already swept towards them. The leader of the black-handed bodyguards used his unparalleled strength to teach these human warriors who had never fought against the orcs a good lesson. This lesson was called strength. The round shields that were neatly lined up in a row did not seem like shields at all. They were easily swept away by the heavy iron pillar in one breath. The sound of the iron shields exploding was mixed with the screams and wails of the city guards, deeply stimulating the nerves of every city guard behind them. Fear gripped their hearts easily. For a moment, even their hearts forgot to beat. Every dilated pupil reflected the horrifying figure that was 3 meters tall. It did not look like a living creature at all, but more like an ancient demon god. The first row of city guards whose arms were smashed into pieces let out a shrill scream. The second row of city guards was almost stunned. They paid with their lives for the momentary lapse in concentration on the battlefield. The muscles of the orc bodyguards swelled to the point that they were about to explode. With the strength of a giant, the long iron pillar that was swung out with all its might stopped abruptly within half a meter. Then it turned around and swept again. Those who fell to the ground avoided the disaster. The second row of city guards who were stunned on the spot had their bodies sliced in half at the waist. The scene was so bloody that it easily destroyed their rationality. Oh, I don't want to die. These city guards who could only bully gangsters and thieves on normal days suddenly lost their will to fight. They collapsed and abandoned their swords and shields, trying to escape from this terrifying shuraba in a fluster. Out of the gladiatorial arena was the first street of Rotterdam Kingdom known as Gladiator Street. This street that mainly sold swords and weapons had always been the favorite of the rich and powerful. Ordinary citizens were not qualified to enter this street. As a subsidiary industry of the gladiatorial arena, this street not only had a large number of high-quality weapons and armor that were far superior to the standard weapons, but also all kinds of rare equipment and accessories. A gladiator with a broken sword and a useless shield would not receive much cheers no matter how good his skills were. The rich and powerful who had gladiators would invest in their favorite gladiators with gorgeous armor and accessories. After all, this was where their pride was. Hence, the leader of the bodyguards found a huge skull of a six-horned rhinoceros. This huge skull had already become extremely hard after being soaked in molten iron. Together with the 6 huge horns that extended forward, it was a terrifying piece of equipment that could attack and defend. The only problem was that this thing was too heavy. Even the troll slaves could not use it. But now it all belonged to the bodyguards. Holding it, the bodyguards easily caught up with a carriage with a gorgeous noble coat of arms. They crashed into it with their hard and sharp horns. Half a second later, the entire carriage was blasted into pieces, along with the people inside, turning into scarlet scraps. Blood and internal organs dyed the entire Gladiator Street red. When the orcs fought from one end of the long street to the end, they saw a huge square with a fountain as well as a huge building with pure white walls. Luck, Tar Ogre. The bodyguards let out a deafening roar again. Without hesitation, the 100 orcs launched an attack on the Rotterdam Kingdom, which had the most guards and was the most heavily guarded. Clang clang clang. When the Rotterdam Kingdom could not close the drawbridge in time, and even the palace gate was breached, not only were the higher-ups of the Rotterdam Kingdom alarmed, but also a priest who was preaching in the palace's sanctuary. There are actually enemies in the Rotterdam Kingdom? Hearing the battle cries not far away, a burly male priest suddenly stood up. Teacher Fao, I'll go take a look. The archbishop sighed as he watched his disciple lift the heavy war hammer effortlessly. This disciple was good at everything. His devotion to the holy light and his faith in the holy light were also unparalleled. However, he felt that he was a little out of place with the profession of priest. Go. Chapter 2:14. The shrill alarm was hurried and ear-piercing. As the king of the Rotterdam Kingdom, Menethil II could no longer sit still. He abruptly stood up, and the torch-shaped crown that was like a claw exuded a scorching majesty. King Rin, as well as all the guests, please calm down. As the king of the Rotterdam Kingdom, I have the confidence and ability to protect your safety. Please wait here for a moment. After saying that, Menethil II waved his hand without caring about the reactions of the others, and a large number of royal guards immediately rushed into the large conference hall to guard the main paths. There were also mages who came in to set up defensive arrays. The commotion was so exaggerated that one could imagine how humiliated the Rotterdam Kingdom would be after this incident. The representatives of the various countries were either agitated or grumbling in their hearts. Their reactions were also rather interesting. Of course, the funniest ones were Lang and Lothar. The two of them couldn't help but look at Duque as if to say, I knew it had something to do with you, kid. Duque shrugged and waved his hand as if he was innocent. Lang rolled his eyes and said, Who are you trying to fool? You've set 100,000 orcs on fire. You're the one with the most cunning ideas. Lothar was even more direct and his face turned sullen. Being forced to a corner by the two big shots, Duque had no choice but to secretly make a 7 gesture. Okay, it was Lang's turn to remain silent this time. Lothar rolled his eyes. 7 referred to the 7th MI7. As an intelligence agency that belonged directly to the king, Lang didn't think that Duque had the ability to reach out to the 7th MI7. Needless to say, this was obviously a move by the 7th MI7, and as the head of the internal affairs of South Shore, Duque should be more or less aware of it. He seemed to have played a role. Lang was half right. If Lang went back to ask, he would get the answer that it was a plan planned by the 7th MI7. In fact, it was triggered by Duque. Because of Van Cleef, Duque found the master who taught Van Cleef the skills of a bandit. Duque bluntly pointed out that guy's identity. As a military intelligence agency, they had planted a spy around an important minister of the kingdom and were caught. This was undoubtedly a major failure. That guy's face also collapsed in an instant. How important was Duque now? In the army, there was even a saying that even if Lothar were to die, Duque should not die. Because these hundreds of thousands of exiled soldiers and civilians were now completely supported by Duque. Duque could review more than 1,000 reports and requests in an afternoon, and then he could multitask and write 10 different reports with 10 magic hands at the same time without making any mistakes. In fact, the system elf helped to categorize and summarize the confidence. After summarizing and reporting, Duque thought about it, and the system elf controlled the hand of magic to write the comments. It was no exaggeration to say that Duque alone was equivalent to a cabinet and 100 civil officials. Coupled with Duque's previous brilliant military exploits, if Duque went to the king to complain, not to mention a small intelligence officer like him, the entire MI7 would definitely suffer. Duque pretended to be sullen and scolded angrily. If you have so much time to do this, you might as well think about how to help His Majesty promote the establishment of the Alliance of the Seven Kingdoms. Even throwing a few orcs to Lordaeron to provoke that old man Tyrannus would be better than doing this. Although this sounded like an angry remark, it was a different matter when it fell into the ears of the female assassin Pasania Shah, the boss of MI7. Because the Horde used a large number of wargs, which also had a sensitive nose, MI7 almost lost all channels of intelligence. Lang's dissatisfaction with MI7 had been there since the beginning of the Orc War. Pasania was eager to do something that was beneficial to the kingdom. Duque's seemingly unintentional words inspired her. As an intelligence agency, she had the right to deal with the captives, so she took away 100 orcs. Unfortunately, she didn't know the orc language, so in the end she could only bite the bullet and come to Duque. Duque didn't say anything and directly translated for Pasania. In fact, Pasania had also vaguely guessed that Duque wanted to use her and MI7. Some things were like a layer of paper that could be broken with a poke. With enough tacit understanding, no one would be able to break it. Duque wanted to use MI7 to promote the establishment of the alliance. MI7 wanted to make contributions to prove themselves. The result of this matter would not harm the interests of Stormwind. As a result, the two sides tacitly joined forces. Obviously, the head of MI7 did a good job. Tyrannus was kicked out of the conference hall like his butt was on fire. Then what's the new method you've prepared? Lothar asked reluctantly. Duque raised his hand and displayed a smaller holographic projection. It was a clip of the Battle of Stormwind. The new display method really stunned Lothar. Sorry, I misunderstood you. Lothar was also a very straightforward person. Seeing that Duque didn't really participate in this matter, he quickly forgot about it. At this moment, in the square in front of the main hall of the palace, the orcs were still charging forward. The arrows were like a storm, but they couldn't take the lives of the berserk orcs. Just like in the beginning of the war in Stormwind, the guards of the Rotterdam kingdom underestimated the toughness of the orcs' skin and flesh. The sharp arrows were stuck less than 3 centimeters into the orcs' skin. It seemed that the orcs had become porcupines, but the orcs still roared and charged forward like demons. The shield swordsmen with large shields were easily blasted away, and dozens of spears stabbed at the same time, but they were all swept away by a single stick. The orcs were simply monsters that couldn't be killed, which made the guards of the royal family tremble in fear. The only thing that kept these guards standing here was their glory and their determination to not retreat. However, the orcs had finally met their match. It was a priest who was emitting a white glow. To the guard's knowledge, such a guy who knew some kind of healing magic was similar to the shaman's healing magic. The guard didn't think that such a guy could stop him. He was wrong. He was ridiculously wrong. When he used the large 6-horned rhinoceros skull to slam into it, the scene that happened below made him stunned. A hammer. A large silver hammer that was swung at high speed was mixed with a ferocious power that was no weaker than that of a chieftain, and it smashed towards the horned rhinoceros skull. With a loud bang, the horned rhinoceros skull that had smashed the carriages and destroyed the human shield formations one after another was easily smashed into pieces of various sizes by the hammer like a piece of glass that scattered in all directions. Without hesitation, the guard waved his right arm and blasted out the huge iron pole that he had pulled out from the arena. However, the strength of the other party was completely beyond his expectations. Clang dash. There was a loud clanging sound that was loud enough to make the surrounding guards cover their ears in pain. The guards' eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. What did I see? The iron pole that was as thick as an arm was bent by the hammer. Chapter 215. What the hell is this? Is this still the strength of a human? The human in front of him was clearly wearing a clergy's robe, but he had a body full of strong muscles. Although in the eyes of Blackhand's bodyguard humans were all weak creatures with thin arms and legs, this human was clearly stronger and more powerful than other humans. Without giving Blackhand's bodyguard any more time to think, the priest used his hammer to knock away Blackhand's huge iron pole. Clang! The huge iron pole that was more than 4 meters long turned into a stream of light and flew more than 10 meters away, stabbing into the wall of the snow-white palace that was more than 5 meters tall. Monster! I will punish you on behalf of the holy light. The young priest with a reddish-brown beard swung his hammer again. The huge two-handed war hammer was as light as a child's toy in his hands. The young man's golden beard fluttered in the wind caused by the hammer. So strong. This was the last thought that the guard had left in this world. Just like how the guard had killed the humans with violence, he was now being killed by the humans with the same violence. As the leader of the slave rebellion and the strongest among the orcs, the death of the guard dealt a huge blow to the morale of the orcs. To the young priest's surprise, none of the orcs retreated. Their eyes were red as they shouted "Lock, Tar Ogre," which the priest could not understand and rushed forward. The priest had no choice. Behind him was the palace of Lordaeron. Not only was there the king of Lordaeron, but there were also the king of Storm and other dignitaries. He did not know why the orcs would choose to carry out such a reckless attack that could not even be considered an assassination, but he knew that he could not let a single orc go. He could not count on the guards of the royal family of Lordaeron. He resolutely swung his war hammer and rushed forward with a fighting spirit that was not inferior to that of the orcs. The orcs were brave. They were natural war machines. Not only did they have stronger bodies than humans, but they also had stronger strength and faster speed. They also had a crazy fighting spirit. If he lost his weapon, he would use his fists. If his wrist was broken, he would use his feet to kick. If his feet were broken, he would use his teeth to bite. That priest saw with his own eyes an orc whose hands and feet were nailed to the wall by a pikeman not far from him. Taking advantage of the fact that a soldier went to check, the orc used his mouth full of fangs to bite off the soldier's neck. What a frightening creature this was. The priest could not help but be moved. With the addition of another priest who was also wielding a large hammer, the battle became even more one-sided. Not long after, all 100 orcs were annihilated. However, the price he paid was the lives of at least 500 Wong clan guards. This was not even counting the number of victims in the Street of Gladiators and the arena. King Tarina's Menethil, who had heard the news, arrived at the scene with a large group of guards. The horrifying scene in front of him almost made him vomit. The large number of dismembered corpses of the guards stung the king of Rotterdam's eyes. The king of the strongest human kingdom trembled, unable to speak for a long time. His wrinkled face looked a little old, but he was not yet 60 years old, so he was not yet senile. After a short period of extreme anger, Menethil too calmed down. Call King Lang and the other countries' representatives here. Although what happened today is a misfortune for Rotterdam, I do not wish for this misfortune to spread to all the human kingdoms. After giving the order, Tarinas noticed a priest who did not fit in with the royal guards. The priest was wearing a priest robe that only had the upper half of his body left, and the lower half of his robe was torn. He was also holding a large hammer. Not far from him there was another priest dressed in a similar outfit. Looking at their blood-stained bodies, it was clear that most of the orcs' deaths were related to them. Greetings, two young clergies. Did you kill these orcs? Your Majesty, I only killed 55. Your Majesty, I killed 38. King Tarinas was stunned by the answers of the two priests. After a few seconds he asked, May I know your names? I am Uther. I am Tyrion Fordring. Two priests carrying huge hammers bowed to the king of Lordaeron in unison. The scene was as weird as it could get. I admire your courage. As the king of Rotterdam, I announce that you will be rewarded. However, before that, I have more important things to do. I must first form an alliance with the other human kingdoms to fight against these hateful green beasts. At this moment, Tyrinas, who had been waiting to see what would happen, made a decision. The next report made Tyrinas even more certain of his decision. A duke, an earl, and a countess who was known as one of the top 10 beauties of Rotterdam were unfortunately killed on Gladiator Avenue. In addition, nearly 2,000 people, including more than 300 city guards and 600 Wong clan guards, were killed. And the reason was just the rebellion of 100 orc gladiators. Caught off guard, Rotterdam paid such a heavy price for a mere 100 green-skinned beasts. Just the thought of this made Tyrinas tremble in anger. If he did not do something, the nobles would not let him go. The people would not let him go either. Even though Tyrinas felt that something was not right, the threat of the orcs was real. If all the orcs on the other side of Sodder Bridge were so terrifying, then the Dalagan kingdoms in front of Rotterdam would not be able to withstand them. When the other human kingdoms were destroyed, the last remaining Rotterdam on the continent would not be any better. At this time, King Lang and the other countries' representatives arrived. Other than Lang, Duque, and Lothar, who had already experienced the war with the orcs, the other countries' representatives were all dumbfounded. Such a tragic scene left them speechless. At this moment, two messengers galloped into the palace, one in front and one in the back. Report: a large number of orcs have appeared from Loch Moden. They have already taken down the south gate of Danmoro and are marching towards the Iron Furnace Castle. Report: more than 100,000 orcs have been spotted in the wetlands. They are expected to reach Sodder Bridge by tomorrow. These two pieces of news were like a bolt from the blue. The dwarves' representatives from the Iron Furnace Castle and the humans' representatives from the Riptide Castle were completely destroyed. Lang had emphasized more than once that the orcs' goal was to take over the entire planet. But all the representatives subconsciously thought that it was enough for the green-skinned beasts to take over Stormwind. When the day of all-out war came, they suddenly realized that the appetite of those damn orcs was terrifying. Chapter 216. Dang dang dang. The alarm that represented death and danger had actually stopped a long time ago, but the long ringing of the alarm still reverberated in the ears of every citizen of Lordaeron, every noble and every representative. This sound was a warning to the world that the peaceful days were gone, and the cruel and bloody war was coming. Without hesitation, the representatives of the various countries summoned mages and used expensive magic mirrors to transmit everything that happened in the capital of Lordaeron back to their own countries. The amount of magical gemstones needed to be consumed for such a long and large magic scene was shocking, but this time no one was stingy with the money. In the reconvened meeting, every representative carefully watched the video of all the magic elements produced by Duque. Duque showed King Tyrinas and the other representatives the savagery and terror of the orcs with a huge cube with a side length of more than 10 meters. The unyielding primal madness. The bloodthirsty, cruel and terrifying killing. It was a berserk aura that said it would not rest until the last soldier was dead. Every scene brought a deeper shock to the representatives. When Duque played the images of the conquered lands at the end of the video, no matter adults, children, commoners or nobles, everyone had to admit that this was a battle for the survival of their race. After the 5-minute demonstration ended, there was no other sound in the meeting room other than the sound of people gasping. Sir Marcus, can I save a copy of this video and send it back to my king? The one who spoke was the representative of Cultivation. Not only him but the other representatives also expressed their desire to get a copy. I'm sorry, this is my unique magic technique, evolved from the inheritance of Mediv. I can't divide or transfer this magic, but I can demonstrate it again for all of you through the magic transmission. Seeing that the situation had been decided, King Tyrinas of Lordaeron stood up. He first looked at King Lang. Alright, it seems that we have reached an agreement. Then I will follow the request of King Lang Rin and officially send an appeal to the other 5 human kingdoms, as well as Kuel Salis and Iron Furnace Fort to form an alliance to fight against the orc horde together. I hope to meet with the kings or messengers who can represent the will of the kings in the throne room of Lordaeron within 2 weeks. In this era it was never easy for a king to travel. If they traveled by land or sea, it would probably take the furthest dwarves more than half a month to reach the Rotterdam kingdom in the north of the continent. Everyone knew that the beastmen's attacks were like fire. Other than the kings who dared to play with teleportation portals, riding on griffins was the only option. In this era, teleportation was very unreliable. Mastering teleportation magic was no less than asking an ordinary person to pick the only correct sesame out of 100 pounds of black sesame from 10 meters away. Not only did they have to lock onto the exact coordinates, but they also had to make sure that the spatial state from the starting point to the destination was stable. Generally speaking, only those whose surrounding space had been reinforced by a large number of spells were suitable to be the end point. For example, the capital of magic, Dalajan, or the High Elves Kuel Salis. In this day and age, the only ones who dared to play teleportation around the world without making any mistakes were Antonidas and the other two Breaking Dawn wizards. The matter was settled. Lang, Andoin and Duque heaved a sigh of relief. After returning to the guest house, Andoin asked the Morning Star Mage to do a check to ensure that no one was eavesdropping. Then he said to Duque seriously, "I know the gist of the matter. It may not be appropriate for me to say this, but I still decided to say it. As a senior and a partner who has gone through life and death together, I have to remind you that it's best not to get in touch with the people from MI7. The intelligence agency that reports directly to the king has always been a forbidden place for all kings. Lang is a very open-minded person and I know he won't mind. Can't guarantee. Right. William should be a good king." Speaking of this, Lothar seemed to be in a bad mood. Duque was like a fox that had gotten his way. He smiled and raised his right hand to swear, "I swear I will never use my schemes against my own people." Skid. "Wait, you don't treat King Tarinas as one of your own?" "Not before, but now I am." Hearing Duque's reply, Lothar was really speechless. At this time Lang came in, and there seemed to be an unresolvable worry between his brows. "What's wrong, Lang?" Lothar seemed to be a little more casual when there was no one else in the room. "No, I'm still thinking about something. It seems that the formation of the alliance is inevitable. But, who will be the leader? Isn't it His Majesty Menethil?" Lothar was stunned. Duque secretly sighed. Lothar was really too naive. The smell of autumn was getting stronger. Be it the growing ears of rice or the heavy fruits on the branches, it was a sign that this year's harvest was going to be good. The fact that the northern continent was able to reap a bountiful harvest in this year of war was a good result. The new fields near the refugee camp in the Hillsbrad Hills might also have a good harvest. Lang and Andoin walked over to pat Duque on the shoulder. It was simply unbelievable. If Duke hadn't acted first and asked for permission from the Bear family, if Duke hadn't stubbornly forced all the warhorses in the army to be pulled to cultivate the land, if Duke hadn't bought the cattle at a high price from all over the place, if Duke hadn't done so. This was something that was simply impossible to achieve. If there were no accidents, they would be able to harvest a batch of summer food at the end of the month. That alleviated the food crisis near South Shore. Although the 5,000 tons of food that Duque bought at a high price sounded like a lot, it was only enough for nearly 500,000 people to eat for 2 months. However, there was now a new saying in Hillsbrad that Stormwind was actually going to occupy the land. Damn it, have you ever seen a refugee farming an entire area? From the edge of South Shore to the foot of the Alterac Mountains, almost every inch of the plains had been cleared. Every wild wolf in the mountains was used as a sumptuous meal. The caves were full of snowmen. Now that the snowmen had been slaughtered, the caves were used to store food for the winter. However, the news that the various countries were going to form an alliance suppressed all the objections. On the 8th of October, a large number of dignitaries rushed to the Rotterdam kingdom. The meeting that was hailed as the most important to establish the alliance was finally held. Chapter 217. Alliance. It was a word that made Duke feel very happy. Before transmigrating, Duque had never thought that he would witness this moment in history. The huge golden bell was rung, and the long iron chain pulled the gears and struck the bell, producing a melodious and pleasant sound that spread throughout the entire Rotterdam kingdom. In the east, southeast, south, southwest, west, northwest, north and northeast, The rich Rotterdam kingdom laid out a red carpet from the city gate to the Rotterdam kingdom's capital for the kings and representatives of the 8 kingdoms. Similarly, the soldiers of Lordaeron lined up neatly along the red carpet all the way to the capital. Walking on the red carpet on the streets of the capital, there were girls on the 2nd and 3rd floor of the tall houses on both sides, scattering beautiful flower petals towards the streets, forming a beautiful rain of flowers. The people of Lordaeron cheered, welcoming the kings and representatives of the various countries as heroes. King Langrin of Stormwind, King Aiden Pyrenod of Altrak, King Jean Greymane of Gilneas, King Dalen Proudmoore of Kultiras, King Salas Trollbane of Stormguard, Riptide Fortress, Breaking Dawn Wizard Antonidas of the Dalajan Kirin Tor Tower Parliament. High Elves represented Senator Dalcan of the Silver Moon Parliament. Dwarves represented Prince Magni Bronzebeard of the Iron Furnace Castle. Because the Iron Furnace Castle was besieged by the orcs, King Madoran Bronzebeard could not leave, so he sent Magni, who was known as the King of Blacksmiths. Together with Muradin Bronzebeard, who was originally the ambassador of the Iron Furnace Castle in Lordaeron, Lordaeron now had 2 dwarven princes. It could be said that other than the High Elves, all the countries sent their highest-level leaders to attend. This had never happened in the past 1,000 years. In a sense, this also represented the strength of Lordaeron. The leaders of the 8 countries arrived together, and King Tyrrhenas did not care who he welcomed first. He simply waited in the throne room for the leaders of the 8 countries. The 8 doors of the Rotterdam kingdom were all opened, and the leaders of the various countries entered the magnificent palace almost at the same time, stepping into the throne hall. In the tall and spacious Gothic throne hall, the arches and pillars that were covered with pure white reliefs were the most beautiful works of art in themselves. The master artist used the reliefs to describe the story of Thoradin the Great's pioneering for mankind and the building of Lordaeron. A huge 7-colored glass window hung at the top of the ceiling and in 9 directions. Sunlight shone in, and the entire vault was filled with colorful and beautiful colors. The orange rainbow light blended with the amethyst-like light, and the ruby light and amber light complemented each other. The entire vault looked incomparably gorgeous. Meanwhile, the lower half had the most scientific diffuse reflection system. Sunlight shone through the transparent, pure-colored glass windows and landed on the large stone balls suspended in the middle of the throne room. The light was then reflected onto every throne. This kind of warm and mysterious radiance made everyone feel a mysterious sublimation of their souls. He didn't make things difficult for anyone, nor did he look down on anyone. The 360-degree circular throne room was divided into 9 equal parts. Tyrrhenas Menethil II stood in front of the throne in the north. Tyrrhenas spoke as he watched the kings arrive in front of his seat. 2,800 years ago, in order to fight against a common enemy, the Trolls, the human Arathar Empire and the High Elves Kuel Salas Kingdom formed an alliance and established an eternal covenant. 1,200 years ago, although the Arathar Empire disintegrated for a better future, the human kingdoms were still united as brothers, and there has never been a war between the kingdoms. Now we all have a common enemy, the orcs. I hope that this time, we can reach an unbreakable and powerful covenant that unites the humans, elves and dwarves. Menethil II's official declaration was not very exciting, but at least it was flawless. After everyone applauded, the kings and representatives sat down. Let me first report on the situation at Riptide Castle. Magni Bronzebeard's loud voice sounded first. The dwarves were known for their impatience. For example, the dwarves used fishing rods. How about it? That didn't sound like a problem, right? The problem was that this so-called fishing rod was actually a gun. What, you use fishing nets to fish in the stream? The dwarves shot at any fish they saw in the shallow water and all the fish died. If they could blow up fish, they would not fish with nets. If they could kill fish, they would not fish. The dwarves' temperament was obvious. Magni waved his hand, and the specially invited Dalajan mage immediately used a magic mirror to show the fierce battle at the gate of Iron Stove Castle. In this world where swords and magic were the core, the dwarves' black technology was only second to the gnomes and gnomes. In the dwarven main force there were dwarven cannons like mortars, dwarven steam tanks and so on. Didn't it sound like a completely mechanized army? The problem was that the orcs were F***king demolition workers. An orc warrior spun a huge 4-meter-long iron pipe, thicker than a human leg like a windmill. The dwarves relied on the mountain's terrain to make the 5 to 6 ton steam tank charge down the narrow mountain path. Unexpectedly, the berserk orc swept it horizontally, and it exploded at the foot of the mountain. When the dwarves fought against the orcs, they were not much weaker in terms of strength, but in terms of size, they were at an absolute disadvantage. The orcs swung those heavy weapons and smashed them down. Chapter 218. King Salas Trollbane of Stormguard spoke. The Solder Bridge was also under heavy attack. Thanks to King Stormwind Lang's valuable experience, we did not suffer too many losses. After saying this, he also played a live video. The situation here was much better. The orcs could not pass through the huge straits with strong winds and strong waves, so they could only attack the narrow Solder Bridge. Unlike the dwarves, where the horde could climb mountains, the orcs only had 2 bridges that looked wide during normal times, but felt narrow during battles. 30 meters wide sounded like a lot. The terrain in the northern continent was slightly higher, otherwise why would it be called the Earthy Highlands? However, they had to withstand the firepower of more than 100 ballistian catapults that were deployed along the mountain to the north of the bridge, as well as more than 30 arrow towers and 1,000 javelin team members who hid in the blockhouses in shifts day and night. 30 meters? That was a target, alright. No matter how brave the orcs were, they would only be cannon fodder. If this bridge had not been made by the dwarves and was extremely sturdy, an ordinary bridge would have collapsed long ago. Thus, the Stormguard people only sacrificed manpower and resources, not lives. King Salas did not forget to give King Lang a grateful look when he played the video. Without Stormwind's full set of javelin manufacturing blueprints, the warriors of Riptide Stronghold would probably still be fighting the orcs with useless bows and arrows. Not only blueprints, but a large number of craftsmen had also come to help Stormguard make the javelins while teaching the craftsmen of Riptide Stronghold. The alliance had not yet been officially established, but Stormwind was already doing its part as an ally. Moreover, before today's meeting, Duque had already made it clear to King Salas that if Riptide Stronghold needed help, his 7,000 private soldiers could go to the Earthy Highlands at any time. Of course, Salas Trollbane did not know that according to the situation he would not have the opportunity to use such reinforcements. And it just so happened that Duque knew this, which was why he had come to offer his help. Salas had been greatly frightened by the orcs, and now that he had such a loyal ally who promised to help him for free, Salas was so touched that he almost cried and snot flowed out of his nose. If he knew that Duque turned around and muttered to himself, "It feels so good to be able to increase favorability by making a promise that doesn't need to be fulfilled." He might even want to kill Duque. Of course, these were all assumptions. With the orcs as their enemy as well as the support of the craftsmen from Duke Stormwind Duke Marcus, Stormguard was definitely a country that responded positively to the alliance. However, it was relative. Apart from the Rotterdam kingdom that had just been slapped in the face by the orc slaves, the kings of the few countries that were closer to the north behaved rather indifferently. This was especially so for the representative of the High Elves, Councillor Dalcan of the Silvermoon Parliament. This fellow was actually admiring his newly manicured nails. Lang and Anduin could not help but frown. Why are these guys still observing at a time like this? Anduin was the most direct. He secretly kicked Duque and whispered, "Don't you still have information to submit?" Duque rolled his eyes at Lothar and finally raised his hand. "I, Duke Marcus of Karazhan of Stormwind, have important information to submit." Those who could attend the meeting, even if they were standing behind the king, were all important ministers of the kingdom. King Terenas nodded. "I agree to submit." In the history of the alliance, one of the biggest losses was that the leaders of the various countries had initially thought that the orcs did not know how to build ships. Now what Duque submitted was an image that he had personally sent Darnielle and the search team of 3 ships to retrieve. The huge mirror showed the scene of a group of orc laborers working in full swing. Although the work of these crude fellows was completely unsightly, it could still be clearly seen that it was the keel of a ship. This time the one who reacted the most violently was King Kurtira's Dylan Proudmoore. He stood up from his throne and stared at the image with his bulging eyes. If the orcs had a large fleet, Kurtira's would have nowhere to escape. It could be said that apart from Duque's fleet, Kurtira's had no other reinforcements. That was not the end. Duque continued. This is the image of Baradan Bay in the northwest of the southern continent. It happens to be separated from South Shore by a sea. As everyone knows, we, Stormwind, have a fleet of more than 100 warships, more than 10,000 Murlocs and hundreds of Naga. Even without Kratira's fleet, we dare to say that we can defend South Shore. However, there is nothing we can do in other places. In the center of the 7 thrones and the 2 representatives' seats, in front of the huge map of the Eastern Kingdom, Duque let a hand of magic float gently on the map. From the Baradan Bay to the west around South Shore to the north of the land. At this time, it was King Xian of the Gilneas Kingdom's turn to look bad. Of course, King Tyrrhena's of Lordaeron was also in a bad mood. Because near the finger of Duque's hand of magic was the North Stream coast, which was convenient for landing. What was the coast? Wasn't it Lordaeron's Silver Pine Forest? At this time Duque said seriously, of course this is just a guess. Maybe. The direction of the hand of magic changed. This time it went east from Baradan Bay all the way under Solder Bridge to the southeast of the northern continent and then north along the Cape. This time it went over the steep Arthi Highlands, which was full of elemental creatures, and pointed further north to the east coast of the hinterlands. This time it was King Alterac's turn to look bad, but his reaction was not too intense. Is it there? That's even better, let those damned trolls fight the green-skinned monsters, Eden argued. What if those trolls join the tribe? Duque asked back with a cold smile. Eden was very, very unhappy with Duque's questioning. Then at least those dwarves from the Eagle Nest Mountain will be at the front. As soon as Eden's voice fell, Dwarf Prince Magni was not happy. Hey, King of Alterac, watch your tone. Those are our dwarven brothers. That's right, brothers who fight and kill each other. Eden shot a disdainful glance at Mag. Bastard. Even after the War of the 3 Hammers. But we've made up with the Wild Hammer dwarves. I'm warning you, don't insult our Wild Hammer brothers again or I'll not let you off. Magni waved his hammer angrily. Eden snorted coldly and answered with silence. It was a sign that he did not want to pursue the matter further. Beside Magni, Muradin Bronzebeard, who had been an ambassador for many years, was more tactful. He pulled his brother back. Duque glanced at King Eden. Although he quickly retracted his gaze, Noxus still saw that moment of disdain. That was the look of disdain when looking at a dead man. Duque's deduction based on the orcs' shipbuilding ended here. If it wasn't for the heavy atmosphere, Lang almost wanted to applaud Duque's wonderful deduction. In any case, Duque had successfully established the common foundation of the entire alliance. Chapter 219. As a transmigrator who was familiar with history, Duque had a huge advantage at this moment. He did not want to cheat a certain race with long ears, but he knew very well that some members of the alliance could not be invited and were in a hurry. It did not matter if it was out of arrogance or that this country was a scum. In any case, he would never mention this possibility. After all, the biggest difference on the Horde's side had already appeared. Lord Howl's groom Hellscream. Since Lord Howl was here, then the Warsong clan that was supposed to stay in Draenor was likely to appear. No, it was very likely that they had already appeared on the other side of the Solder Bridge. It was just that the ones attacking the bridge now were unknown small clans, so there was no way to confirm it. Since Ghoul Dan had reopened the Dark Portal, then the clans that were supposed to stay might appear. For example, the future Lich King Nizul's Shadowmoon clan, or Kargath Bladefist's Shatterpalm clan. There were more than 10 famous clans. Now that the Blackrock clan was heavily injured, any reinforcements were possible. For the final victory, Duque had long decided to drag down more of the original allies that belonged to the alliance. Duque retreated after he finished speaking. King Tyrrhena's of Lordaeron raised his head slightly. All right, everyone, do you have more information about the evil orcs to share with the kings here? The surroundings were silent. If not, I suggest that we start voting now on whether to form a strong alliance to fight against the evil orc tribe that is bent on conquering the entire world of Azeroth. Please note that we are now discussing the formation of a military alliance. Every country that joins the alliance has the obligation to help each other. They can either provide money, manpower, or directly send troops. Countries that refuse to join will not receive help from the alliance when faced with the Horde's attack. Alright, that's all I have to say. Those who agree to join this alliance, please raise your hand. Originally, the atmosphere was very good. From Lang's point of view, with this momentum, forming an alliance was a sure thing. No matter how one looked at it, it would be a matter of course and all 9 countries would join the alliance. Lang was a little excited just thinking about it. As long as the alliance was formed, would the 9 countries not be able to defeat the Horde? Taking back Stormwind City and rebuilding the foundation of his ancestors depended on this. Who knew that at this moment Magni's loud voice could be heard again? Hey, wait a minute. Have any of you agreed to help the Iron Forge? Without any reinforcements, just relying on the dwarves in the southern continent to hold back the orcs? Is this what you mean by helping each other? King Tyrrhena's looked displeased. The dwarves were always so direct. He had to interrupt Magni Bronzebeard. Since we are forming an alliance, we will definitely help each other. What we need to do now is to set the framework and then decide how to assist, how to coordinate. The dwarf prince, whose beard was so long that it almost reached the ground, showed his straightforward nature. No, I hate to hear the official terminology of you humans. We dwarves are very direct. Is there any help? When and where? Quantity? Personnel? If they can really provide us with enough aid and support, we, the Iron Stove Fort, will join. If not, then I won't waste my time here. I'll hurry back and kill a few more beastmen. Magni's shameless extortion made all the human kings frown. At this moment, more than one king had his own plans. As a country that had already been attacked, the beastmen were not people who would stop until they succeeded. The dwarves would not give up their own capital. If that was the case, even if the humans did not help, the dwarves would fight the beastmen to the death and drag down a large portion of the beastmen's forces. In a split second, more than one king was prepared to abandon the dwarves. In history, they did the same. In fact, this was not a very nice thing to do, and it caused a few countries in the alliance to appear united but actually divided. In the original process, the dwarves only officially joined the alliance when the humans attacked the wetlands and broke into Dan Maluo, saving the dwarves who had been bitterly defending for a long time. But Duque was here. Enough. Duque suddenly shouted. Since you dwarves see the alliance as an exchange of benefits, then we can do it, seeing that we have a common enemy. In 3 days, Stormwind's fleet can reach the deep waters southeast of the wetlands Blackwater Moor. We will give you 10,000 peacebloom and silverleaf flowers, 20,000 heathergrass and 5,000 setback grass. In exchange, we need 15,000 fine steel longswords made by the dwarves. If you don't have them, you can use the standard dwarven battle axes instead. Anyone with a bit of common sense would know that these were low-grade alchemy materials, used to make low-grade healing potions. In a war of this level, high-grade materials were not used much, because high-grade alchemists were needed, and the production would decrease. In contrast, low-grade materials were more useful because alchemy apprentices had a lot of them. Finished products were hard to get, but getting potion materials was definitely a pleasant surprise. Magni was stunned that Duque was so well prepared. Iron Stove Castle did need help, but Magni was putting more pressure on the newly formed alliance. He did not expect the humans to have any preparations. In his imagination, it would take at least half a month to prepare. He only wanted a more specific promise from the human kings, so that he could confirm whether the humans wanted to use the dwarves as cannon fodder. But Duque had undoubtedly outmaneuvered him. This was a meeting of the kings, and Duque would not make empty promises. Either Duque was the biggest liar, trying to trick him into joining the alliance on behalf of the dwarves. Either that or the Stormwind Kingdom had really made ample preparations for this war. It was obvious that the Stormwind Kingdom had come prepared. Stormwind, who was eager to destroy the orcs and restore their kingdom, would not trick the dwarves on such a matter. Magni froze, and his expression turned from anger to joy. It was ecstasy. The dwarf prince was also shameless. No, it should be said that he had no shame or integrity to speak of. He immediately apologized. Sorry. My heart was filled with thoughts of my brothers and sisters in Iron Stove Castle who were injured and unable to receive treatment. I was too emotional. I should not have doubted you humans. Lang had no idea that Duque had done so many things. Lang knew that Duque would never lie to him about such things. He stood up. Prince Magni Bronzebeard, as long as we join the alliance, we will be brothers in life and death. I can promise you that Benedict, the Archbishop of Stormwind, will be willing to lead the priests to our brothers in the alliance to help heal our allies. Chapter 220. The Archbishop of Stormwind. This was a huge bet. Lang had always been known as a wise king. As the dwarf kingdom not far north of Stormwind, Magni obviously trusted Lang more. As for Tarina's, who was full of official words but had no substance, Magni raised his hammer. I represent the Iron Furnace Castle's bronze-bearded dwarves in joining the alliance. Tarina's was not happy with Magni stealing the spotlight, but he would not make things difficult for the dwarves. After all, it was not his Lord Darren that had pledged their support. Then let's vote. The Stormwind Kingdom agrees. Ryan almost rushed to express his opinion. Everyone knew that Stormwind, which had lost its capital, was the most miserable. There was no point in pretending to be in a hurry. It was better to be the leader and promoter. King Dahlin and King Salas spoke at the same time. Cultivation agrees. Stormguard agrees. At this moment, four countries had already agreed. As long as the leader of the Lordaeron kingdom agreed, the alliance would be formed. At this time, the calm King Tarina's raised his hand. Lordaeron agrees. As the strongest human kingdom among the 7 major human kingdoms, the Rotterdam kingdom's approval was expected. Be it out of respect for their status as the leader of the various kingdoms, or as a response to the chaos caused by the orc slaves a few days ago, the Rotterdam kingdom had to join. And with Lord Darren's participation, the remaining Dalajan, Gilnis and Alterac, who were slightly hesitant, also joined. At this point, the 7 human kingdoms and the dwarves had all joined. All the kings and princes looked at the lowest-ranking representative in the throne room, Kuel Salas, member of the Silver Moon Council, Dakin. Faced with dozens of burning gazes, the handsome high elven mage raised his long eyebrows, took a sip of the best black tea produced by the Rotterdam kingdom, and then said in a nonchalant tone, "I'm not interested in the matter." After discussion between the Silver Moon Council and His Majesty Anastrian Sunstrider, Kuel Salas will not join this alliance. But as a symbol of our friendship with the humans, we will give you the necessary assistance. Not joining the alliance? Give the necessary aid? Such arrogant and cold words were clearly saying, giving aid to you humans is completely a form of dog food that we're giving you. This time, a few kings stood up angrily and glared at Senator Dakin. To everyone's surprise, it was Magni who opened fire. Hey, Long Ears. Aren't you afraid that those green-skinned creatures will take a big detour to find trouble with you first? At this moment, Duque secretly bared his teeth. Damn, you guessed it. That's right. In history, it was the orcs who had gone around half of the northern continent and went straight to Kuel Salas to find trouble with the high elves. However, Darkin did not seem to mind at all. As if he had been struck by Duque's 7 deadly sins, he retorted, "The magic of the high elves isn't something dwarves like you can imagine. Kuel Salas had the perfect magic defense system. You don't have to worry about our safety." With that, Darkin actually stood up, turned around and left. Gone. He really left. This was no longer a slap to the face of the Lordaeron family, this was a slap to the face of the entire alliance of 8. For a moment, a few kings even had the urge to declare war on Kuel Salas. After all, the human kings were not tribal chiefs. They did not become bosses just because they were good at fighting. Their rationality still told them to calm down. However, the group of kings told themselves that if something really happened to those Long Ears, they should just let them die. Duque, who was beside Lang, was a little puzzled. As a transmigrator and a veteran player, he remembered most of the history. Why didn't the High Elves attract so much hatred in his memory? Well, no matter what, the alliance was still established as Duque had imagined. After that, there was nothing for Duque to do. As the mastermind, Duque had temporarily completed his task. The rest of the matters, such as distribution of military supplies, coordination of military operations, and intelligence gathering, had nothing to do with Duque. Naturally, the one who argued with the king was the king. Although Lang really wanted Duque to be by his side to give him ideas, Duque's words choked Lang to death. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty, I still have 1,300 reports and documents to go through. If I continue to stay here, this number will double tomorrow. I don't rule out the possibility that there will be casualties among your citizens and soldiers during the winter due to various reasons not being handled in time. After all, South Shore is near the Alterac Mountains, and the winter here is much colder than in Stormwind City." Lang had no choice but to let Duque go back to the state guest house. Back at the state guest house, Makarov opened the door for Duque. As soon as Duque opened the door, he saw his little maid, Vanessa. Duke had originally wanted to be a bit more corrupt and had Vanessa wear a very modern black and white lace-made outfit. Then the extremely independent Vanessa ignored the orders of the Duke of Karazhan and the Sky Mage Duke. She removed all the fancy lace on her own. The low-cut front lapel was removed and it became tight. Her black dress was also so long that it almost reached her ankles. Don't even think about cat ears or anything like that. Alright. This was the maid outfit of this era. Duque wanted to say something more, but Vanessa snorted and turned away, not even looking at Duque. Duque would not go so far as to kill a 13-year-old girl. He just wanted to look good. It was not against the law. Sob. Forget it, the more I say the more I cry. The bitter Duque buried his head in the sea of reports and documents. At least Duque was happy, but Lang and Andoin were really exhausted. The meetings between countries were filled with endless wrangling. For the benefit of their own countries, the kings were willing to go all out. 5 days. It took them 5 whole days to come up with a more complete plan. The alliance this time was also officially named the Rotterdam Alliance, just like in history. In fact, it was not until the Rotterdam Kingdom was destroyed in the future, when more races joined the alliance, that people removed the word Rotterdam from the front of the alliance, and called it the Alliance. It was 1 more day than the 4 days in Duque's memory, mainly because Lang did not die. Also, the kings were not willing to let Tyrrhenas be the leader of the alliance, because they felt that Tyrrhenas Menethil wanted to take the opportunity of the Horde invasion to complete the unification of the human countries, and turn himself into the second Thoradin the Great. The kings of the 6 countries were sensitive to all this, and they all resisted Tyrrhenas' complete control of the alliance. In a sense, compromise itself was a part of politics. Sensing the strong opposition of the kings, Tyrrhenas did not insist too much. Finally, on the 5th day, he made a suggestion that he thought was very cruel: to let Lothar, the son of Thoradin the Great, be the supreme commander of the alliance, while he would only be the leader in name. The countries would have to provide troops to Lothar according to their national strength. Chapter 221. It had to be said that Tyrrhenas Menethil II's combat power was almost equal to 0, but his political value was definitely 100. While the king was still alive and kicking, he made a subordinate of the king the commander-in-chief of the 7 kingdoms. What else could it be if it wasn't an attempt to drive a wedge between the 7 kingdoms? Of course, Tyrrhenas also said in a dignified manner, since our ancestors once gathered under the flag of Thoradin the Great more than 2,000 years ago, let us, the new alliance, look up to the same flag. After all, the 7 kingdoms were of the same origin, and Lothar was indeed the best flag. Cleon was also a king with supreme boldness and magnanimity. While Lothar was hesitating, Cleon agreed immediately. Don't hesitate, Andoin. You are our hope of reviving our kingdom. From the moment we left Stormwind City, didn't we swear together that we would revive Stormwind no matter what? Have you forgotten our oath? But I don't care about those empty titles. You are still the loyal you, and I am still the me who believes in you. Even if you don't believe in yourself, you have to at least believe in me who has always believed in you. As long as our will and beliefs do not change, why should we care about the lies of others? Besides, if it's you, so what if I give the throne to you? I believe that if Stormwind is in your hands, it will also stand tall among the nations of the world. His words were very serious, so serious that it made all the sowing of discord lose its meaning. Moreover, he said it in front of the kings of the alliance. If Anduin Lothar was really a despicable person, it would not be impossible for him to seize the throne of Stormwind with the testimony of the kings. Cleon's words caused all the kings to be moved. However, these words that were almost tongue-twister expressed Lang's most sincere and complete trust. It was a supreme trust that surpassed life and the inheritance of his children. No. Lothar had wanted to refuse, but after seeing Lang's passionate and sincere eyes, his heart softened a little. After thinking for a moment, Lothar said, "Then Lang, I hope to become a duke, at least as the Duke of Stormwind." Lothar was interrupted before he could finish. No. King Tyrrhenas walked over. Although he was under the gaze of the other kings, his voice was so soft that Lothar and Lang were sure that they were the only 2 people who could hear him. Tyrrhenas explained, Trust me, as a king, a duke of another kingdom and a knight of another kingdom walking around my territory, these are definitely two different mental states. That's right, in the eyes of the kings, knights were insignificant, but dukes were the pillars of the country. Lothar's eyelids twitched. Perhaps you might think that I'm trying to sow discord between you and your subjects, but unfortunately this is the only choice. The ruler of Lordaeron continued to explain in a low voice. Every king wants to deal with their tribe's problems on their own. At the same time, they are very reluctant to see another king enter their territory. Sir Lothar, you are not a king and your position is not high, so they don't think you can gain anything from this. On the other hand, the nobility of your bloodline is enough for them to not think that they will be looked down upon by other kings. After thinking about it again and again, Lothar finally nodded. All right, I accept the position of commander of the alliance. Lothar's voice had always been loud, and his acceptance made many kings heave a sigh of relief. Tyrrhena's raised his head in arms. Then I declare that all disputes in the Lordaeron alliance are over. We will fight side by side just like our ancestors did in the Arathar Empire. After confirming that every king had nodded, Tyrrhena's continued. Now the only one who is suitable to lead our army, the one who inherited the bloodline of Thoradin the Great, Sir Anduin Lothar, has agreed. So the kings of the alliance hereby announce that Sir Anduin Lothar, the general of Stormwind City, will be our supreme commander. The armies sent by each of our kingdoms must listen to his orders. Those who disobey will be punished severely in the name of the descendants of Arathar. The last obstacle to forming the alliance was finally cleared. As Tyrrhena's voice fell, the throne room, which had been noisy for several days, was finally filled with thunderous applause. Perhaps this was the roar of applause because they had a common enemy. Perhaps it was because they had the same bloodline. No matter what the motive was, it was not important. What was important was that this marked the reunification of mankind after thousands of years of division. It was not only the humans but also the dwarves. This pan-human alliance had finally shown its sharp claws and teeth to the invaders. The 13th of October, the first year of the Dark Portal. It was the dawn of the day and the morning fog covered the land as usual. The citizens of Lordaeron, who were still sleepy, stretched and started a new day of activities. Perhaps they were preparing to harvest food or preparing to open their shops. Although they could not see the first rays of dawn, the people in the city knew that a new day had arrived. The light fog enveloped their beautiful brick and wood houses, and also covered the wide streets of the capital with a thin layer of gauze. Even so, this was still the beautiful Lordaeron that they were familiar with. Everything in their sight, the sounds in their ears and the calm atmosphere of the city, everything was the same as before. But the next moment, as the messenger cavalry shouted along the street, everything was different. They shouted as they galloped. This was a method of spreading news that was only used when there was news of victory. It had been many years since the citizens of Lordaeron had encountered this method. Yes, the last time was when the heir of King Tyrrhena's, Prince Arthas, was born. On this day, every citizen of Lordaeron heard this news. In order to deal with the increasingly rampant orcs, Lordaeron, the 7 human kingdoms and the dwarf kingdom of Cosmodin have formed a pan-human alliance, the Lordaeron Alliance. The leader of the alliance will be King Tyrrhena's Menethil II of Lordaeron. The supreme commander of the alliance will be the direct descendant of Thoradin the Great, the noble Sir Anduin Lothar. All allies must send troops, money and manpower for Lothar to use. The most revered Archbishop of the Holy Light, Alonso Sfail, announces that the Lordaeron Alliance is the representative of justice. The Church of Holy Light will join the alliance in the form of a church, and give every soldier of the alliance the blessing of the Holy Light and supreme courage. Within 3 days this news spread like it had wings, and the entire world of humans and dwarves was excited. Chapter 222. In fact, many things happened on the 12th of October. Firstly, Lothar's military rank was set as the Grand Marshal of the Alliance. In order to show respect to the descendants of Thoradin the Great, the kings who joined the Alliance army were all admirals. Hence, there were the magical military ranks such as Admiral Lang Rin and Admiral Dalen Proudmoore. Since Duque controlled over 100 warships and 7,000 private soldiers from the previous Bloodsail fleet, He had 2 military ranks: Vice Admiral of the Alliance Navy and Brigadier General of the Army. As for how to unify them, Duque solved this problem during the banquet that night. That's right, the banquet. It was a once-in-a-millennium event for so many human kingdoms to unite. The Lordaeron Palace held a grand banquet that night. The nobles who didn't have the chance to come out all came out. Those who were qualified to enter were at least earls. Of course, earls and marquises were not qualified to go and have fun if they weren't dukes who commanded the army. Coincidentally, Duque was the star of the alliance, the inheritor of Medivh, the killer of Sargeras, the leader of the 100,000 tribes, the youngest sky mage, the Duke of Stormwind, and the owner of a large naval fleet. No matter which one it was enough to make Duque the center of attention. King Dalen had long black hair that smelled like seawater. His long and curly mustache made him look very masculine. One could tell from his well-defined face that Dalen was definitely a handsome man when he was young. Not long after the banquet started, he brought his eldest son Drake to Duque. Duque and Lang exchanged glances. Of course, Lang knew why Dalen came. In fact, Lang didn't understand Duque's decision. However, Duque's foresight was far better than his, so Lang agreed with Duque's decision in the end. Hello, Duke Marcus. As partners who are going to conquer the ocean and feed the orcs to the fishes, don't you think we should have a good chat? Dai Lin raised his crystal plate full of wine and touched it with Duque's plate. The two looked at each other and smiled. Then Duque raised the plate towards Prince Kultiras to show his respect. Then he, Dalen, and Drake downed the wine in the plate in one gulp. Actually, I'm very envious of you mages. You used powerful magic to easily seize a fleet. You should know that it would take at least 3 years even if all the shipyards in Kultiras worked day and night. Duque smiled but did not say anything. Your Majesty proud. Oh, you're not thinking of asking me for the fleet that I obtained from the Bloodsail pirates, are you? No. Don't underestimate me. Even though most of those guys are from Kultiras, since you didn't get them from Kultiras, they are your spoils of war. Even if my men don't like them, as long as they still have the insignia of the Alliance on their ships, they are still our comrades. King Dalen was obviously a heroic man of the sea. If this was the era of the universe, he would be the overlord of the universe who said, "My journey is the sea of stars." Normal people would find it hard to dislike such a straightforward man, unless they were his enemies. Duque smiled. It was just as straightforward. Not only that, but there was also a kind of holy light in his smile. No matter who saw it, they would think that he was a selfless saint. That's right, Duque inherited the moral integrity of Medivh. According to the system notification, moral integrity divines skill, hypocrisy. Because the humanity you obtained is far beyond what you should have. If you let this part of humanity temporarily control your body, you will become a holy existence in the eyes of the world. You will be more like a saint who serves the public for the sake of the world. All beings of the non-evil alignment will believe you more easily. Duque opened his mouth. He didn't even deliberately lower his voice. No, actually, I want to say that I will be more at ease if my fleet is handed over to His Majesty Dalen, who is an expert in naval warfare. Dalen and the Drake father and son were stunned. They almost doubted their ears. Not only them, but even the surrounding nobles who were listening to their conversation were stunned. Dalen frowned. Duke Marcus, actually, I didn't mean. I know, but after serious consideration, this is the best choice to maximize the combat power of the Alliance's navy. In fact, I have also discussed this with His Majesty Rin, and His Majesty also supports my decision. As soon as Duque finished speaking, King Lang also walked over and nodded to Dalen with a smile. Duque continued, I may be a genius, but only in the field of magic and strategy. I am a novice in naval warfare. Over 100 warships can only be used as transport ships in my hands, but in His Majesty Proudmoore's hands, it is an unparalleled weapon that can send thousands of orcs into the sea to hell. If it weren't for the fact that the final control of the Nagas and Murlocs is in the hands of my master, I would even be willing to give them to your Majesty to command. Please don't shirk this responsibility. This is for the Alliance. Lang, who had thought it through, was extremely open-minded. As soon as Duque finished speaking, a commotion quickly spread out with the four as the center. There were murmurs of admiration around them. This was what it meant to serve the public and what it meant to look at the overall situation. Which king didn't have their own plans for forming the Alliance? Dalen was definitely very envious of Duque's fleet. In private he had complained to his son more than once that Duque recklessly wasted God's resources. Now he said for the alliance. A fleet of over 100 warships was transferred just like that. What kind of internationalism was this? Chapter 223. When Duque announced that he would be donating 1,000,000 Arathar gold coins on behalf of Stormwind, the entire banquet hall was in an uproar. Perhaps one could say that Duque was putting on a show, but it was still a show. When Makarov brought his men to the plaza outside the banquet hall and opened the chests to show everyone the shiny gold coins, the entire hall was left with nothing but awe and admiration. Duque did not give the money to anyone else, but to the Archbishop of the Church of Holy Light, Alonso's Fail. A long time ago in the Dalajan, a Lordaeran missionary threw a copper coin into the fountain and made a wish. I hope that one day I can spread the way of the holy light to every commoner, and teach them the meaning of the three virtues. This missionary was the Archbishop of the Holy Light, Alonso's Fail. His footsteps covered every city on the continent, and his name as the Saint of Mercy had long been recognized by the entire continent. It was no exaggeration to say that he was the synonym of justice and holiness in this era. Duque said sincerely, I believe that the Archbishop will distribute the funds fairly. Every king was willing to believe in Alonso's character. All of a sudden, the losses caused by the invasion of the horde did not seem to be too painful. What did 1,000,000 gold coins mean? Among the 7 kingdoms, this was already the annual income of a mid-tier kingdom. For example, a small mountainous kingdom like Alterac only had a few 100,000 gold coins in their treasury. Of course, this had to do with the fact that the king's territories were poor, while the Bear family was extremely rich. The only ones who could easily take out 1,000,000 gold coins were courtiers, who traveled all over the world as a merchant, the inhumane mage kingdom of Dalaran and the Rotterdam kingdom, which had the most fertile and rich land. Now, Duque's act of sending money after the fleet was like adding fuel to the fire. All of a sudden, the pretentious souls of the kings were awakened. Courtiers 2,000,000. King Dowlin, who had just received the benefits, raised 2 fingers. The Dalajan speaker, the old man who read Tycoon and wrote Antonidas, smiled and raised 3 fingers. Since the small countries below were acting tough, the king of Lordaeran, who considered himself to be the #1 fighter in the world of acting tough, raised his palm. Hiss. After the nobles gasped, they naturally burst into thunderous applause. An astronomical figure of 11,000,000 gold coins. Just thinking about it made his whole body tremble. But if you thought about it, you would know that Tyrrhena's was very smart. It was because the Rotterdam kingdom would definitely send out the most troops. If nothing went wrong, he would be the one who would suffer the most losses. In fact, it was very likely that the money would end up in the hands of the Rotterdam kingdom. But it didn't matter, the effect had been achieved. Originally, during the meeting, they hadn't decided how many troops each clan would send. As the commander of the alliance, Lothar had to discuss these matters one by one. This was the public relations of the banquet. Lothar didn't expect Duque to put on such a good show, which greatly lightened his workload. Archbishop Alonso's struck while the iron was hot. For the future of mankind, for the future of this world, it's a good thing that the countries have the money to contribute and send their troops, isn't it? Of course, as the leader of the alliance, I announce that the first batch of troops from the Rotterdam kingdom will be led by Duke Alexandros Mograine, and his deputy will be General Abendis. The first batch of troops will be 100,000. 100,000 troops. How bold was that? It was definitely the most exaggerated standing military force among the kingdoms that had yet to enter a full state of war. One had to know that Stormwind City, which originally had 20,000 to 30,000 regular troops, now had 50,000 elite troops. Of course, the war potential of the Rotterdam kingdom was far more than that. The other kings who couldn't afford it were embarrassed. King Salas of Stormguard said loudly, "The earthy highlands don't need any knights for the time being. Chief Commander Lothar, you will see the Highland Knights of the Torrential Fortress within a week." King Xian of Gilneas said in a low voice, "You will see the 1st, 2nd and 3rd Infantry Regiments of Gilneas." At this time, King Eden of Alterac, who had always been experienced and tactful, couldn't keep his face any longer. "The Eagle Knights of the Alterac royal family will be under your command within a week." Chief Commander Lothar. Knights and cavalry were two different concepts. Even though they were both riding horses, knights were much more superior than cavalry. Every knight had to start as a poor knight candidate. They were usually servants who followed official knights to learn horsemanship, combat, etiquette, and other knowledge. Then they had to prepare a warhorse and a set of armor. Don't underestimate a set of armor. A qualified knight's armor, unless it was passed down from generation to generation, was not something that ordinary people could afford even if they worked hard for a lifetime. If it was before Duque's transmigration, it would be equivalent to preparing 1 million RMB. Note that this was only the price of the armor, not the horse. Not just any horse could be used as a warhorse. Ordinary horses could not possibly bear the weight of a few hundred kilograms of armor in human. It was not cheap for a warhorse to bear such a weight and charge at high speed. If converted to RMB, it would be more than 500,000 renminbi. Basically, at a glance, any standing horse that was less than 1.7 meters tall was not a warhorse. So, raising a knight regiment was equivalent to raising at least 5 infantry regiments. These knight regiments were the treasures of the various kings and were rarely seen. The Gilneas kingdom lacked horses, so they directly pulled out their main infantry regiment. When Antonidas told Lothar that there would be a group of 200 mages led by one of the 6 members of the Kirin Tor Council, Lothar was grinning from ear to ear. He gave Duke a thumbs up. "Thank you, child. I see a holy light in you. You have a beautiful heart that shines brighter than gold." The next moment, when Alonso's wrinkled hand touched Duque's shoulder, Duque's entire body emitted waves of gentle platinum light. This was the effect of Duke inheriting the moral integrity of a certain mage god. Haha. Child, I didn't expect that apart from your amazing talent in the path of mystery, you also have unparalleled talent in the path of holy light. If one day you can't continue on the path of mystery, the Stratholme Cathedral's door will be open for you. Awkward. What an awkward situation. So, after inheriting Mediva's moral integrity, I can become a holy priest. Duque thought that as a modern transmigrator, even if he became a priest he would only be a shadow priest. This feeling was really like a dog crying. Not only Duque but the other nobles were also pointing at Duque. No one thought that Duque, who burned 100,000 orcs to death, had the heart of a saint. Chapter 224. Of course, Duque did not have high hopes of becoming a divine archpriest. There were as many bosses as there were stars in the sky. He did not know when he would die twice and he would lose his integrity. Hence, Duke was very touched by Alonso's invitation, but he refused to accept it no matter what. At this time King Dalin came up and patted Duque's shoulder. "Forget it. Archbishop Alonso's, I think a good guy like Duque should not be a saint. The world needs him," and Dalin suddenly smirked. Duque suddenly shuddered. It was a bad feeling. Sure enough, Duque was shot in the next second. Actually, if Duque is willing to use his fleet as a betrothal gift, I am willing to betroth Jaina to him. Not just Dalin, even his brother-in-law Drake, who had a black forehead, said, "I'm told that you look mature but you're actually only 15. My sister is only 12. Duque almost choked on his own saliva and ran to his corpse. Forget it. In the history, Jaina sold her father and caused the death of her father and countless rumored boyfriends. Even if I can resurrect, I can't handle it." Duque decisively shifted the blame. "Haha, I'll pass. I don't want to piss off Prince Arthas." At this moment the 12-year-old Jaina had already shown her potential as a beauty. Arthas, the unlucky childhood sweetheart, was head over heels for her. A little later she would attract the heart of Kael, that's the Prince of Kuel Salis. "Oh, if it's a fair competition I won't say anything even if my son loses." Tyrrhena's walked over. Duque continued to change his target. I don't want to be the public enemy of the Dalajan stars. That's strange. Isn't it natural for explorers of the mysterious path to seek a partner with the same magical talent? Archmage Antonidas came over to make up for it. Duque cried in his heart. "You guys, why are you so obsessed? Do you think you're the aunties of an illegal matchmaking agency?" Duque stuttered. At this moment all of these old and sly fellows could see that Duque had an inexplicable resistance to the name Jaina. Dai Lin was magnanimous. He laughed and patted Duque's shoulder. "It's all right. Perhaps you will change your mind after you see the jewel of Kultiras in my house. Tarinas waved his hand. Kalia, come here. His father. A generous and gentle voice came, and the bones of the surrounding young nobles all softened. Kalia Menethil was the second in line to inherit the throne of Lordaeron. She was the elder sister of the famous Arthas in the future, and she had a good relationship with Arthas. It had to be said that Princess Kalia had inherited her mother Queen Lian's beauty. She had a quiet oval face, extremely exquisite and noble features, and soft golden hair that cascaded down to her shoulders like a waterfall. When Kalia, who was wearing a white dress, walked gracefully in front of Duque, intentionally or unintentionally showing off her exquisite figure. Everyone around could not help but gasp in admiration. What a perfect beauty. She was only 15 years old. If she became an adult, how beautiful would she be? Lothar whispered in his loud voice, "Damn, I almost want to marry again." This joke was met with a burst of friendly laughter. A faint blush appeared on Princess Kalia's face, but she still greeted him graciously. "Good evening, Duke Marcus." "Lothar, this bastard actually tricked Duque." "Hey young man, the princess greeted you. Don't you feel embarrassed if you don't give her a greeting gift?" For a moment the surrounding nobles jeered. Gift. 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 Anyway, everyone knew that Duque was a tycoon. Didn't the cunning Tarinas want to more or less trick Duque? "Kid, at least give me 10 pounds of pearls, right?" Duque was actually poor. Although he did not care about money, there were hundreds of thousands of refugees, and he had come to Lordaeron to show off. He really did not have much money left. Because of the war, the nobles instantly tightened their purse strings. It was difficult to sell luxury goods for a high price now. Something like 10 pounds of gold pearls, Duque did not want to give it. Moreover, she was the princess of Lordaeron, the strongest of the 7 kingdoms. Would she care about this? Of all things, she could not lose face. Duque gently waved his mage cloak. He was just short of saying, "Get out of my way, I'm going to show off." Then Duque made his move. During the days of training in Karazhan, although Duque did not create an ice circuit that was comparable to the arcane fire magic circuit, but there was still a small circuit of ice magic. Duque pointed his finger, and the wine in the waiter's hand suddenly flew into the air. As Duque's left index finger moved nimbly, the wine suspended in the air actually started to spin. What kind of magical control was this? Duque's understanding and control of elemental magic was completely beyond the imagination of an archmage like Antonidas. The show continued, and a cold breath emerged from Duque's palm. Crystal clear ice petals formed in front of everyone's eyes. An ice rose made of ice elements. Under the brilliant light, every single ice rose petal could be seen clearly, layer upon layer, forming a blooming rose. Not only that, but there was also a faint flame flowing in the cold flower path and petals flickering. Just this dreamy appearance alone caused the ladies in the audience to exclaim. At this moment, Duque was possessed. He did not know why, but he remembered some classic scenes from movies. He did a perfect hand kiss, imprinted his perverted pig mouth on the back of her snow-white and soft hand, and then handed over the rose of ice and fire that was enough to kill the heart of almost any girl. "Your Highness Princess Kalia, only the most beautiful rose can match the most beautiful you. I hope you like this little gift." With that, Duque retreated with great style. To be honest, Princess Kalia had seen all kinds of luxurious gifts, but she had never seen such a creative, high-end and classy magic rose of ice and fire. Tarinas turned his head slightly to look at his court archmage. The old archmage shook his head in shame. He was telling his king, "I can't do such exquisite magical control." On the other side, the princess was completely drunk. Her aqua-blue eyes stopped moving, and in her field of vision, there was only this beautiful dreamy rose. The flickering flame in the rose had attracted all her attention. She did not even know that her face was blushing so beautifully. Chapter 225. Her Royal Highness even forgot to return the greeting. After a full 10 seconds, she seemed to have snapped out of it and raised her head. She lifted her skirt with her left hand and bowed gently. "I'm sorry I've been rude." "Thank you, Duke Marcus. Your gift is so perfect that I was dazed." Beside her, a noble girl had already whispered, "Oh my God, if someone proposed to me with such a rose, I'd probably be willing to marry him immediately. Her unrestrained voice made Princess Kalia blush all the way to her neck. She suddenly turned around and walked away. Sorry, I'm a little uncomfortable. I've been rude. The nobles who were left on the ground were all shocked. How is this uncomfortable? It's clearly the most dazzling pearl of the Rotterdam kingdom. Her Royal Highness is tempted? At this moment all the big shots present felt a jolt in their hearts. The situation seemed to be a little subtle. No king was a fool. Everyone could tell that although Stormwind was defeated, it was still victorious. They could still maintain their vitality under such a great disparity between the enemy and their allies. Lothar was very outstanding, but his excellence was still within the scope of human imagination. Duque was different. Not only was he ridiculously young, he also lacked courage, wisdom, strategy and strength. He fought the demon king Sardras, set fire to the orcs and saved 50,000 elites with an ice ship. If all of that was just limited to rumors, the establishment of the alliance after Duque came to the Rotterdam kingdom was really seen by all the big shots. Everyone knew that without Duque's intelligence and deductions, the alliance would not have been established so quickly. Everyone knew that without Duque the kings would not have made a promise so easily just now. Perhaps without Duque the alliance would still be established and the troops would still be sent. However, with Duque the process would be accelerated by who knew how many times. Which one was the most anxious now? Of course, it was Stormwind who had lost their territory. Without Duque's operation, Stormwind would only be left with a group of refugees and defeated generals. Even if the refugees survived, they would only be absorbed by the countries in the northern continent. They would become expendable in the war. The destruction of Stormwind was equivalent to a disguised war bonus for the other countries. Stormwind, on the other hand, would only be an empty shell. It would be controlled by the various countries. How could it be as free as Lothar was now? Even if the other 7 countries all retreated, Lothar still had 50,000 elite soldiers to fight one last time. This was the confidence of one's family. In the eyes of other kings, Stormwind, who had lost his territory, was full of treasures. And Duque was obviously a gem among them. King Turinas stroked his long beard. He suddenly felt that Duque and Kalia's union was not a bad choice. King Turinas said, Duke Marcus, the royal family of Lordaeron is having a small banquet tomorrow night. Are you free? Facing the king of Lordaeron's gaze, Duque shivered slightly. Did I act too tough just now? Sorry, I have to deal with more than 800 documents every day. I've accumulated a lot these days. Duque seemed to be very busy. Who knew that Turinas's eyes suddenly lit up? Not only him but the other kings also stared at Duque like hungry wolves. Duque knew that he had misspoken again. Stormwind is really lucky. My 12 cabinet ministers might not even be able to deal with 800 documents in a month. Turinas seemed to have found another reason to rope in Duque. Duque's mind was filled with curses. Yes. In terms of magic and strategy he was starting to mature. But whether it was in his previous life or this life, his political sensitivity was zero. Duque decided to play dumb. After some small talk, Duque was dragged away by Lang. On a balcony the door was closed, blocking out the noise of the banquet. At this moment the king, who had always been wise most of the time, seemed a little lonely. Duque, actually I want to say I'm very grateful to you. Without your arrangements I would have died a long time ago. Most of the soldiers and civilians of Stormwind also died in the city. I wouldn't have formed an alliance today. Ugh, your majesty, wait, let me finish. You are a very talented person. To be honest, I always thought that I could give you everything you want, but it turns out that I was wrong. Stormwind is too weak. If you think that joining another kingdom is a better choice, I will give you my blessings. Wait. Your majesty. Wait. Are you mistaken about something? I've never thought of leaving the Stormwind kingdom. Duke, who felt that something was amiss, quickly interrupted Ryan. But that was an invitation from the strongest nation in the sea, Courtiers, and the strongest nation, Lordaeron? In Lang's eyes, Stormwind was now a broken ship. What kind of joke is this? I just boarded the best ship, and now the captain is asking me to jump ship? Only Duque knew that after a period of time, the 7 human kingdoms, except for Stormwind, were all destroyed or crippled. Duque couldn't calm down at all. He knelt on one knee. Although I wasn't born in Stormwind, I like Stormwind. Here, there is your majesty who trusts me, and there is a commander who is willing to cooperate with me. Here I can use my strengths. Your Majesty, if you still don't believe me, you should at least believe in your deceased good friend, Mediv. Mediv. Suddenly hearing his good friend's name, Lang was in a daze. Yes. You can see Karazhan as a legacy or you can see it as a deal. Mediv gave me Karazhan, gave me a direct passage to the supreme throne in the mysterious world. As the price I am willing, and I am also obliged to protect Stormwind. So your Majesty, don't think too much. Even if I marry a noble lady, there will only be one more Duchess of Karazhan, and not one more prince of some kingdom. Hearing this, Lang was finally relieved. At this time, Lothar came over with Archbishop Fail. Lothar quietly opened the glass lattice door of the balcony, and Duque went to open it. Archbishop Alonso's has something to say to us. Alonso's walked over and smiled. I won't take up too much of your time, but I think what I'm doing will be of great help to you and the entire alliance. First of all, Stormwind is righteous. The Church of Holy Light will not only provide support to the alliance, but after defeating the orcs, the Church will also start collecting donations from the believers to support the reconstruction of Stormwind. This sentence carried a lot of weight. Lang's Stormwind had almost lost its source of funds, and every bit of support was precious. Thank you, Father. Lang bowed slightly. The second thing, and the most important thing, is that I found a new way to use the holy light. It's an important way to use it. Chapter 226. It's here. It's here. It's really here. When Archbishop Fao said that, Duque's heart almost jumped out of his chest. He had had enough of the ferocious people in the tribe. Any one of them would make him have no choice but to let Lothar go. Think about this terrible dialogue. I have General Pan, oh, it's Rorhel scream. I let Lothar go. I have the sword sage Samuro. I still let Lothar go. I have the hammer of destruction. I can only let Lothar go. What the hell is that? It's embarrassing just thinking about it. Do you think there's no one in the Grand Alliance? Duque really wanted to find a chance to make use of the flexibility of the mages to bully the tribal chiefs. However, Duque was clear that the demigod warlock Ghoul, Dan in the tribe had definitely awakened. Not only Ghoul, Dan but the remaining warlocks were all strong enemies. Under the confrontation between the two armies, Duque had almost no chance to get past the warlocks and directly beat up the chiefs. But it was completely different now. The glorious name of Alonso's Fao was not remembered by the majority of players before Duque's transmigration because of his holiness, but because he was the mentor of the first 5 paladins. Among the 5 gold saints, oh no, among the 5 paladins 4 of them were monsters that were so fierce that they did not seem human. In history, except for a guy who was shoved in by Lothar to make up the numbers, the 4 of them had left their names in history. It was a little exciting to be able to witness the birth of the first paladins. Duque, Lang and Andoin all pricked up their ears. Do you remember the conversation we had after you came to the Rotterdam? Fao paced in front of them. I remember. It was about the destruction of the Northshire Abbey. At this point Fao's gaze dimmed. I have to admit I was very depressed. If I could find a way for the monks to survive this sudden outbreak of war, I would not have been able to do so. Perhaps the bearers of holy light would not have suffered such a heavy loss. Noxus nodded and sighed. Indeed, the path of holy light of the priests does not allow them to wear any equipment above leather armor. Thin cloth clothes do not give them enough protection at all. In the face of the orcs' great strength, we are still weak even with our full armor, let alone the priests who have almost no armor at all. Fail smiled, a genuinely happy smile. When I was thinking hard about these problems, an idea suddenly appeared in my mind, as if the holy light had enlightened me. Have you found a way? Lothar asked. That's right. Fail clapped his hands and said, I will establish a new branch of the church, the Holy Knights. Not only did they have devout faith but they also practiced a lot of battle techniques. Not only did they receive combat training, but they also received training in prayer and healing. These brave warriors will have both military and spiritual abilities, especially the ability to use the power of the holy light to bless themselves and others. Can you really do it? Noxus was full of doubts. He didn't think that a priest who could only heal soldiers could charge to the front line to kill the enemy. Duque almost wanted to remind Lothar that it was the two he saw in the palace that day. But Duque held back. Fail smiled and made a gesture of blessing. Lothar and the other two saw a wave of holy power suddenly converge from Fail's body, whose whole body was glowing. It gathered above Fail's head and formed a holy seal shining with red light. That holy seal was obviously full of power and strange power, but the three of them felt a sense of peace and tranquility at the same time. An indescribable sense of happiness reverberated in their bodies. Is this the power of the holy knights? Lang muttered to himself. Yes. Fail smiled. Duque impatiently asked, have you found suitable candidates? Actually, I have found 4. You can meet them tomorrow morning. But if you have more suitable candidates, you can also provide them to me. I want to personally enlighten them with the holy power in their bodies in the holy city of Stratholme within a week. At this moment Duque was excited. This wasn't some fake great master randomly blessing a female benefactor's body. This was the enlightenment of the one and only holy light grand teacher in the world of Azeroth. Perhaps the 4 legendary guys were already very powerful before they became holy knights. But before they were enlightened, there was a limit to how powerful they could be. After enlightenment their strength would simply break through the sky. Thinking back to history, Wuther dared to charge against thousands of orcs with just 12 holy knights. Just the thought of that scene made his blood boil. Easily seeing the eagerness on Duque's face, Lang also smiled. Duque, are you very optimistic about Father Fail's plan? Yes. Absolutely right. That's great. Duque was not stingy with his praise. I think this is definitely an epic-making new force. Not only will I let my follower Reginald Windsor come to receive enlightenment, I strongly recommend that Duke for Dragon come as well. Bolvar. Lang was a little puzzled. Your Majesty, don't you think it's very suitable? Duke for Dragon has an extremely devout faith, a fair heart and superb combat skills. Of course, in Duque's heart, Bolvar was much worse than Anduin at this moment. He would still be sending himself to death if he met the chief of a large clan. After hearing Duque's words, both Lang and Anduin felt that it was a good idea. Anduin asked, who will watch over the South Shore army if Bolvar comes over too? Lang smiled. Of course it's me, the general of the alliance. After saying that, Lang gently punched Lothar's chest. The unparalleled trust between a king and a subject was completely revealed. Thank you for your hard work, Your Majesty. Lang waved his hand. Just get rid of the orcs as soon as possible and take back our Stormwind city. On the morning of the 13th of October, the whole city was in an uproar over the establishment of the alliance. Lothar and Duque arrived at the main courtyard of the Rotterdam Cathedral. They had already had breakfast and were waiting for the arrival of Archbishop Fail. At the appointed time, the Archbishop appeared and walked over calmly. Thank you very much for accommodating an old man like me despite your busy schedule. He turned around and waved his hand, and 4 men appeared from the end of a nearby corridor. They walked towards Fail in high spirits. Duque's eyes lit up all of a sudden. 4 burly men, each of them wearing shiny armor. Every part of the armor, the shield in their hands, and the top of their helmets had the emblem of the Church of Light. All of them were carrying a sword, and from the way they walked, Duque could tell that they were at least skilled swordsmen. The only problem was that the armor and weapons were brand new. Not to mention the marks of intense battle or repair, there wasn't even a stain on them. Chapter 227. If you didn't guess wrongly, there might still be some dishes to order now. No, that should not include Uther and Tyrion for din. When the orc slaves wreaked havoc in Rotterdam a few days ago, they had already started killing. However, at that time they were using hammers and now they were using swords to pretend to be gentle. Come to think of it, they were meeting the commander-in-chief of the coalition army now, not going into battle to kill the enemy. Why would they use the king's hammer? Oh, why would they use the king's hammer? Anyway, in order to give the commander-in-chief a good first impression, they naturally had to look good. Few people would bring their own background music when they appeared, and Uther was clearly one of them. He was handsome and elegant, coupled with his burly figure and sunny appearance, as well as the faint glow of holy light wrapped around his body. If one took a closer look, they would feel as if they were listening to the organ playing hymns in a church, and the faint but melodious singing of the holy children echoing in their ears, giving them a feeling that even their souls had been sublimated. Please allow me to introduce Uther, Siden Dathahan, Tyrion Ferdin and Turayan. Fail pointed at them and smiled like a proud father who was promoting his sons to the parents of the women at a blind date. They will be very important members of the Silver Hand Knights that I am about to form. Fail paused for a moment, and then introduced Lothar and Duque to the 4 paladin-in-waiting. This is Sir Anduin Lothar, the general of Stormwind City and the commander-in-chief of the Alliance. And this young mage is his colleague Duke Marcus, the great hero who killed the demon king Sargeras and burned hundreds of thousands of orcs. Fail smiled. Now it's time for you young people. The 6 of you have a good chat alone. The archbishop nodded to everyone and left the courtyard. Duque had never thought that he would one day be worshipped and sought after by those famous and powerful people of later generations. However, thinking about it, Duque had long been famous. In fact, Lang had also intentionally or unintentionally promoted Duque's reputation through MI7. Compared to Lothar's series of inconspicuous achievements, Duque's deeds as a young hero were more legendary. The more desperate the situation was, the more people hoped to see a hero, a role model, a leader who could lead them forward. Duque did not disappoint. Therefore, Duque's reputation also rose. You couldn't kill Sargeras back then? I'm sorry, but nobody knows how to destroy the fallen Titan's soul. Just how powerful are demons? When I have time I can teleport you to Karazhan. It's attacked by demons once a week on average. Lothar and Duque were surrounded by the candidates. Turalian, the shortest of the group, seemed to shrink back. Others, like Uther and Tyrion, were relaxed and at ease. Compared to Duque, who was familiar with the future, Noxus was still doubtful. He didn't know what this new class would bring to the Alliance's army. When Lothar was thinking about how to give them hope without dampening their enthusiasm, as well as how to make arrangements for them, Uther broke the silence. Dear Commander, the Archbishop has told us the direction to go. We are also very clear that we are about to face an extremely cruel battle. We will listen to all your orders and we will fight for the people and die for the people. You can order us whenever you feel it is necessary. Uther was a tall man with a chiseled face, and his expression was always full of determination. There was a faint golden glow in his sea-blue eyes. It was a gaze that was almost holy. From his words and body language, Duque and Anduin could feel Uther's devotion to the holy light. He was more fanatical and determined, but lacked the passion and delicacy of Archbishop Fail. Siden Dathahan, who was the tallest and was labeled as 2.03 meters by Duke's system, had an even thicker warrior's aura. He waved his fists forcefully. We don't ask how many enemies there are, we only ask where they are. We will completely defeat those orcs and drive these dirty and cruel fellows back to their planet. Tyrion Fordring was equally firm in his faith, but he was not as fanatical as Uther. He chatted with everyone amiably. The last one was Turalian. The short paladin candidate did not actively participate in the discussion of faith. Instead, he talked about the war and the state of affairs. For example, he said, if the Horde doesn't have superior shipbuilding skills that can shorten the time of building a ship to a few months, then it's very likely that the orcs will crush our defense line with their sheer numbers. The pleasant conversation made time pass quickly. It was almost noon and Lothar, the commander of the Alliance, had to attend a luncheon. After the 4 paladin candidates bid farewell, Lothar chatted with Duque as they walked. What do you think of them? Uther, Siden and Tyrion are all sharp knives against the Horde. Turayan is more rational and his faith may not be strong enough. But he is definitely a talented commander. I'm not targeting their personalities. Lothar frowned and sighed. It's not that I doubt my old friend Alonso's, but I really doubt how useful they are. Why is that? Duque raised his eyebrows. Lothar seemed to be thinking about how to phrase his words, even though he did not think that Duque was the kind of person who would blabber. After a while he said, there is too little time. They seriously lack the time to prepare. Do you remember what you said? When Stormguard blocks the northern path of the Sodder Bridge, then it is estimated that the tribe will arrive in the northern continent within a month or even less. Yes. So what? Didn't you see their performance of killing the orcs in the palace a while ago? Perhaps they are very powerful warriors, but none of them have experienced war as so-called paladins. Of course, I do not doubt their combat ability. But we are not short of warriors. This was what troubled me the most. I had to command a group of professionals who had never appeared in this world before, rookies who had never experienced the test of battle before. Fail wants them to play a role as the core. This is the core. Do you want me to appoint a few rookies as the deputy commander of the alliance? Duque smacked his lips. Oh, that is indeed the case in history. I do not know why the kings would agree to appoint Zhou Xian, who has no combat experience and is not a prince or a duke, as the deputy commander of the alliance. When they arrived at the luncheon, King Terena's words made Duke feel like he was on the outside and on the inside. Duke Marcus, the 7 kings have unanimously elected you as the deputy commander of the alliance. Pfft. Chapter 228. Duque choked on the wine he had just drunk, which amused Terenas and Andoin. Cough cough cough, why me? Don't tell me you're not going to choose the holy knight that Archbishop Fao recommended? Duke whispered his doubts. At the long table, Terenas elegantly put down the wine plate in his hand. That's also a choice. Terenas looked at Andoin and Andoin immediately gave him a knowing look. Andoin continued, I think it is similar to me being elected as the commander of the alliance. If it were not for you, Duque, perhaps the kings of the 7 kingdoms would choose a paladin recommended by Archbishop Fao, who is more neutral. King Terenas continued, the dwarves only need support. After receiving sufficient support, the dwarves will not have any mobility in a short period of time. But the kings of the 7 kingdoms are different. They have to consider who is more reliable to hand over their troops to. Not to mention that the 7 kingdoms have handed over their elite troops this time. We trust Sir Lothar, but there are times when we need to divide our forces. In fact, it is not easy to find a candidate who is strategic, decisive and fair enough to be accepted by the kingdoms. Andoin continued, I understand that the Archbishop wants the paladins to perform a miracle, but why should we take an unnecessary risk when there is a better and safer choice? Terenas chuckled, his white hair swaying in the wind. At this moment he looked a little cute in Duque's eyes. There is a ready-made, publicly recognized, fair and neutral candidate with an impressive battle record. Why not choose a completely unknown newbie? That is the greatest absurdity. Duque was a little embarrassed and he finally felt that he had changed history. Yes, he had forgotten that he was the most suitable one. In history, Lothar almost went to the northern continent alone. Being born in Stormwind City, he naturally could not affect the interests of the 5 kingdoms of the northern continent, Kakur-Tiras. It was the same for Duque. The root of Duque's interests was in the southern continent, and Duque's series of successes such as the command of the fleet had successfully conquered the various kings, which was why Duque had risen to power. Zhou Xian, who had ascended to the top in a single bound, also ascended to the top in the following discussion with Lothar. Unfortunately, halfway through his ascension, Zhou Xian continued to be Lothar's assistant. However, he was only an adjutant in the army, not the deputy commander of the alliance, let alone independent military power. In the eyes of King Menethil and Lothar, Bishop Fao wouldn't be dissatisfied with such a high position even though they hadn't seen the so-called Holy Knight yet. This was all for the sake of the Archbishop. After all, a paladin was a combat profession, not some strategist college or military academy. I'm sorry, Turalian. Duque smiled bitterly in his heart. After that, they talked a lot during the lunch. Terenas talked about forming the Silverhand Knights with the paladins as the core. This was not a short-term matter. First, it would take at least a month to recruit people from Rotterdam and even the entire northern continent. Then they would train, reorganize and carry out their beliefs. All of these would add up to at least 3 months to form a combat force. Meanwhile, the horde's attack across the sea was imminent. After the lunch, during the afternoon military meeting, the hastily built grassroots troop gathered together. The main military ranks of the people present were Commander-in-Chief Andoin, Deputy Commander-in-Chief Duque, Admiral Daolin, Vice Admiral Mograine and Rear Admiral Abendis. Of course, the main reason was that most of the kings had rushed back to their countries to mobilize their troops, and the King of Rotterdam was not good at military affairs. The kings also had a private agreement to prohibit Terenas from commanding the army. Daolin was a king, but he played the role of admiral in the alliance's navy well, showing his respect for Lothar. The current situation is that my fast reconnaissance ship discovered that the Horde has built a large number of small and medium-sized transport ships, but not a single ship that is comparable to our destroyer. A large-scale sea crossing without any cover? Lothar's head hurt. This is not common sense. That's common sense. Duque calmly reminded. If it were a normal human, it would be impossible for them to climb over the cliffs on the east and north side of Stormwind City to attack the two low walls of Stormwind City. In fact, the Horde did it and Stormwind City fell because of it. No one refuted Duque. Lothar looked up. Who has a more reasonable inference? Duque glanced at Admiral Daolin and pointed to South Shore in the middle of the huge map. If I don't have good shipbuilding skills or enough time to build a large number of battleships to resist the enemy, but I have enough troops, I will use a large number of transport ships to drown the enemy. Daolin looked at Duque unhappily. I want to remind you, Deputy Commander-in-Chief, that the first fleet of courtiers has arrived at the dock of South Shore, and the second and third fleets will arrive in 5 days. The storm fleet that Your Excellency passed the command to me is also waiting for orders in South Shore. What he meant was not to underestimate the dominance of courtiers in the field of naval warfare. Very good confidence, Admiral. May I ask how many battleships the 4 fleets have in total? 12 reconnaissance ships, 312 destroyers, 89 cruisers and 18 large battleships. Admiral Daolin puffed out his chest proudly. If the Horde comes with these moving target ships, the courtiers' navy can destroy them all on the sea. Very good number, but what if the Horde comes with more than 10,000 transport ships? 20,000? 30,000? What if the number of enemy ships is far more than the total number of cannons of your army? Duque continued to ask. Daolin's expression finally changed. This is not possible, right? Duque pulled out a 3D video. It was a clip of the Horde's laborers sacrificing themselves to attack Stormwind City. Do you see? These are the Horde's laborers. These laborers have no value in the eyes of the orcs, and they will be used as cannon fodder. There are more than 500,000 known Horde warriors, and this does not include these laborers. If I hold this card, I'll build 20,000 transport ships. The first 5,000 will be the lowest number of laborers to maintain the ship's voyage. I'll even use the ships to exhaust the humans' ammunition. When your ship's cannons are about to explode, my official army will arrive. The generals were all numb. Lothar took a deep breath. What good idea do you have? Duque smiled. Please allow me to introduce the South Shore Defense Line. Chapter 229. Duque was very busy. After introducing the South Shore Defense Line, originally he would have continued with the military discussion. In his imagination, in the next week all the big shots would be discussing the same thing. Which path the Horde would most likely come from, where they might attack, and how to quickly mobilize the Alliance's army to that area. It was autumn harvest time and not every country was called Lordaeron. Not every country had enough food reserves to feed the entire country for a year. For Gilnis, Alterac and a few other countries, they had to at least block the damned Horde outside before their important hinterland and crops were trampled. But Duque was invited away. As one of the only 2 Breaking Dawn wizards in the world, Antonidas was a very special existence in the Alliance. He hoped that Duque could participate in an exchange with the Kirin Tor Council. The Kirin Tor Council was fundamentally different from the Tirisful Council that Sargeras had destroyed. The Kirin Tor Council only governed the Dalajan Kingdom, while the Tirisful Council was a world organization that mainly fought against demons and prevented the abuse of magic. Duque couldn't refuse his request. I've already asked the Chief Commander for leave for you. Although I'm a little sorry, the Kirin Tor Council hopes to meet you in the Dalajan. I'm sure you're familiar with teleportation portals? Antonidas, who had a long white beard that almost reached his belly, chuckled at Duque. Duque nodded. Then arcane energy flowed out of Antonidas' hands. Spatial lock. Arcane energy harmonization. Spatial scan. A series of small enchantments dazzled Duque. When he counted to 3, Duque stopped counting. Anyway, the system genie had already recorded it for him. He would study it slowly when he had the time. When he stepped into the purplish-red portal that seemed to be breathing and contained a strange arcane wave, Duque immediately felt the difference in magic between him and Antonides. With the help of the system, Duque was already very strong. In terms of quality, there was a huge gap between them and even Morningstar wizards, let alone Breaking Dawn wizards. Antonides had only used the strength of a morning star to open the portal. Duque also knew how to teleport. However, when he was traversing through space, Duque was more like playing dodgeball. He carefully avoided one unstable space after another during the high-speed teleportation. He would rather take a long detour than take the risk of passing through any unstable area. Antonides, on the other hand, was different. Apart from those terrifying black hole-level spaces, all the spatial rifts and space obstacles were driven away by his magic power. For example, when Duque encountered a mountain, he would circle around the foot of the mountain, while Antonides would directly open a tunnel in the mountain. Well, it was the kind that could be completed in an instant. How could they compete? When it came to the use of spatial magic, this revered old wizard was definitely the most reliable after the death of Medivh. Duque had also teleported himself to the Daoist. His magic was strong enough for this task, but when Duque successfully crossed this daunting distance, Duque would probably vomit and have diarrhea for a while before he could recover. Antonides's teleportation was as peaceful as Duque's ride in the elevator before he transmigrated. Personally, visiting the Daoist was a magical feeling. If there was any place in the human kingdom that could be called a miracle, it would be the Daoist. Located south of Lake Lordaeron, this wondrous city was a combination of wisdom, power, grandeur, beauty, art, and mystery. It was the most dazzling pearl in the entire continent. Even though the Lordaeron kingdom on the northern shore of Lake Lordaeron was equally beautiful, compared to the Daoist, it still lacked the extraordinary sense of miracle. In the past, almost all human mages in the world studied the arcane spells they learned from the high elves in this city. The mysterious and elegant white towers that spread throughout the city symbolized the wisdom, ambition, status, and power of the mages. Antonides had invited Duque here when the enemy was right in front of him. Naturally, there was no way he could give Duque any time to sightsee. Duque was directly invited to the magic hall where the Kirin Tor Assembly was located. The Kirin Tor Assembly Hall was a very magical space. Strictly speaking, this place did not belong to the Daoist city. In a sense, this was already the airspace. If his vision and the system elf's altimeter were not deceiving Duque, this place was 1,024 meters above the Daoist city. The low clouds were at his feet. Looking ahead, it was already a dark sky with twinkling stars. It was as if a hook had been placed here, firmly hooking the sky and hanging in the air. Only the bright lights of the Daoist city on the ground allowed Duque to barely see that this place was still a part of the world of Azeroth. Not only did he have the high-altitude view like he was sitting on an airplane, but the space at the top of his field of vision also had slight changes. The space-time fragments that were swept up by the space storm caused the scenery in the sky to change strangely. Sometimes it was the darkness that made people sleepy, or maybe it was the brightness of the rising sun. This was obviously not a scenery that could be seen normally. The 6 council members stood on a huge metal ring that was even higher than Duque. If Duque wanted to talk to them, he had to raise his head, and each of them stood at a 60-degree angle. This made Duque rather unhappy. But what made him even more unhappy was the attire of the council members. Perhaps it was to make the person who was being questioned feel a sense of awe. To outsiders, they could only see a purple headscarf embroidered with the symbol of the Daoist kingdom and a huge cloak that covered their entire body. Everything else, such as their body shape, face, and even gender, were concealed by their clothes and magic. What the hell is this? Are they inviting me to be judged? Duque was furious. Antonides keenly sensed Duque's anger and he apologized. I'm sorry, the Kirin Tor counselors are all selected in secret. Because we have a more democratic national system, the votes of the counselors on key matters will affect the policies of the entire country. So in order to avoid being bribed, threatened, or any other kind of pressure, other than me as the chairman, they all use this method to meet outsiders. What angered Duque the most was not this, but the look in their eyes. In their eyes, there was no such thing as a deputy chief of the alliance, only a lowly sky mage. Enough! Duque shouted, causing the 6 counselors to tremble. I am not a Daoist mage and I am not a prisoner here to be judged. Raise my chair. Take off your masks. It is basic etiquette to show your true face. If you can't even do this, I will return now. The Alliance will not be unable to defeat the Horde without you, Dalajan. Chapter 230. Duque's words were very serious, and several counselors immediately retracted their contemptuous gazes. But this was not enough. Please understand our secret principle. Humph. Duque sneered mercilessly, expressing his disdain for this pretentious game of shadow. Duque was very clear about the thoughts of these counselors. Why did the Kirin Tor Council invite him here? To put it nicely, it was to exchange information. Of course, this was the main reason, but there were also many secondary reasons. For example, after entering the Alliance, would Pharaoh be treated the same as a normal knight? Perhaps they felt that directly pressuring Noxus, who was originally a warrior, was a little too obvious, and the effect might not be good. So they first looked for him who was younger and more familiar with the magical domain. Also, there was another important reason: Karazhan. As the Dalajan that claimed to be the only holy land of mages for thousands of years, they were very unhappy that there was a Karazhan in the south of the continent that could compete with them. After all, this shook the Dalajan's only transcendent position. However, Medivh was so arrogant that the Dalajan could not do anything to Medivh. Not being able to touch Medivh did not mean that the Kirin Tor Council could not do anything. That was why the Violet Eye was born. This was a secret organization established by the Kirin Tor Council to investigate Medivh and monitor his activities. It was a secret branch of the Kirin Tor Council that ruled the Dalajan. Their mission was to monitor Karazhan and its master Medivh, who were filled with spatial cracks. To put it nicely, it was to prevent things from getting out of control. To put it bluntly, once Medivh fell, they would be the first to reap the benefits. In fact, even Khadgar was originally a spy sent by the Kirin Tor to Medivh's side. However, Medivh generously accepted Khadgar as a disciple. In the original history, not only did Khadgar righteously get rid of Medivh, who was possessed by Sardras, but he also took good care of his mother's family, and helped the Violet Eye transport Medivh's treasures and most precious books back to the Dalajan. It sounded like as a disciple, Khadgar inherited his master's legacy and had the right to do with it, right? In theory this was true. But considering that Lang collected magic books for his good friend, Medivh, and also in order to create a new holy land of magic in the south, Khadgar's actions were very unkind. Originally, Khadgar was definitely a saint to the Alliance, but to the Stormwind Kingdom, who had spent a lot of effort to build Karazhan and provided a large number of magic books, Khadgar was definitely a bastard who helped others. But in that time and space, Lang also died, and later on Noxus also died. The young King Varian had no one to complain to, and Stormwind also lost control of Karazhan. But now, Karazhan was in Duque's hands. The Dalajan still wanted to get their hands on it? Don't even think about it. This was why Duque was so unyielding. Duque ignored Antonida's explanation and said sternly, "Sorry, I'm a stubborn person. I also have a mysterious talent that allows me to see through appearances. For example, when I was still a magic apprentice, I directly discovered that Medivh was possessed by Sardras. So your so-called secrets are meaningless in front of me." As soon as he said this, the entire Kirin Tor Parliament fell silent. Every counselor's eyes were filled with disbelief. As a transmigrator with the system elf, Duque easily locked onto his first target. It was in existence with the same magic circuit as him. Although the magic covered up a lot of the aura, those eyes could definitely help Duque analyze it with one look. He stared straight at the figure on the left. Hiding in the shadows will bring shame to the name of the Sunstrider, Prince Kale, that's. Duque immediately heard a surprised gasp from under the man's mask, but it quickly turned into a chuckle. "You're right, young Duke Marcus," the mage replied. "Personally, I also think that talking to a dark figure is too rude for the Alliance's deputy chief commander." With a quick gesture and a low incantation, the disguise on the elf prince disappeared, revealing the gorgeous violet and gold robe he was wearing. As a high elf, Kale, that's had a full 100 points in terms of appearance. He had long, silky blonde hair that could sell shampoo advertisements. That head of golden hair that felt more luxurious than gold silk slid past her shoulders, matched with that incomparably delicate all-shaped face and the incomparably sexy red lips in the eyes of a silly girl. Perhaps a wink was enough to make all the girls who followed Korean dramas before Duque would be willing to jump into a river for him. But Duque hated him. Men hated men who were more handsome than themselves. Don't ask why. Kale, that's expression had a hint of vigilance towards Duque's slight disgust, but his good upbringing allowed him to maintain his elegance. Is this better? Much better, thank you, Duque said. He turned to look at the counselor on his right. What about the others? Do you want me to continue? Lord Krasus? Or Lord Thazad, who is right behind me? As a red dragon, Krasus and Thazad, who had a unique smell of the undead, were easier to distinguish than a lighthouse in the dark with the help of the system elf. 4 of the 6 counselors had revealed themselves, and the remaining 2 had no reason to hide. The counselors of the Kirin Tor Tower all thought so, and they all removed their concealment methods. They didn't know that Duque didn't know the remaining 2 counselors at all. Duque wasn't in the Daoist, so who would know who the 2 counselors that weren't even recorded in history books were? In fact, he wouldn't even know if he saw them. After being slapped in the face by Duque, Antonidas waved his hand, and the surrounding landscape immediately changed. It became a rectangular table that was commonly seen among nobles. Please sit. Antonidas took the lead and sat on an invisible chair. The 6 counselors sat on one side and Duque sat on the other. Since their positions were equal, Duque didn't make things difficult for them. He exchanged information about the tribe with the Daoist as equals. You said that the orc planet is Draenor? Through the dark portal they connect the 2 worlds? That's terrible. If there's a chance, we must destroy the dark portal. What? The warlocks of the tribe all use the forbidden power of the demons. They can absorb human life and they can also resurrect people and turn them into immortals. This is really annoying news. We will study how to deal with it. After a series of exchanges, Duque was sent away by Antonidas. Chapter 231. After Duque left, the 6 counselors returned to their original 6-man council. What do you think? The authenticity of the information is quite high, and it matches what we have gathered. It is obvious that Duke Marcus wants to cooperate with us sincerely. The problem is that he is very wary of us Daoist and even slightly hostile. Maybe he knows Khadgar's identity. Sigh. Put the matter of Karazhan aside for later. Right now, the group of orcs who are trying to destroy the entire human race and all other intelligent life on the planet is the biggest problem. I suggest that we form an additional group of mages to participate in the attack on the Horde. This requires an additional counselor to lead. Agreed. Agreed. 3 voices said at the same time, agreed. That means we have a unanimous vote. Alright, who's going? Sorry, my identity is a little sensitive and my father has not approved it yet. That was a little embarrassed. It's okay, I'll go. The one who spoke was Krasus. Together with Thazad, these 2 high-ranked mages with strange fates officially participated in the second battle of the Dark Portal. After Duque returned to Lordaeron, he received news that the Daoist was willing to send an additional group of mages to help, and it was an additional Kirin Tor leading the team. There were no additional requests. Lothar gave Duque a big bear hug on the spot, almost strangling Duque to death. I actually did nothing. Duque felt wronged. No, you making a trip there is the greatest contribution to the alliance. You don't have to say anything, I know. Lothar was so touched that tears were about to come out. He had gone to Dalaran to threaten them. Just one round of acting tough had such an effect. Duke was speechless at the thought of it. Thinking of the good cards that the Horde would have next, Duque felt that his side was not good enough. Duque had originally wanted to watch the first-generation paladin transform into a magical uncle, burst. But a piece of news made Duque's good mood disappear. Vara sent a message. The fishman was unstable. At that moment, Duque really felt as if he had just woken up. To be honest, the Murloc army had always been Duque's private territory. I don't care about the 3rd, 4th, 5th and 6th battles. I don't care if the Calamity army runs rampant on the continent or if Arthas kills his father and teacher to destroy the entire continent. If I really can't handle it, I'll hide in the middle of the sea and become an island master, shouting, I'm going to be the pirate king. At least I won't have to turn into a ghoul. How could he say that the mermen were unstable? Duque rested for a while and told Andoin that the merfolk in South Shore town were a little troublesome before teleporting away. Originally, South Shore did not have a teleportation point. However, as the inheritor of Astral Mage Mediv and a die-hard fan of Blitzkrieg, before leaving South Shore, Duque had drawn a huge teleportation portal in his temporary wooden house. Right in front of Andoin and Dailin, Duque raised his hand and countless azure runes floated out of Duque's hand and danced in the air, forming ribbons of runes that spun endlessly. The huge magic formation with a diameter of more than 3 meters spread out under Duque's feet, and everyone was dazzled by it. In the next moment, Duque's figure seemed to have been sucked into a small black hole, and disappeared from the lawn of the palace. Dailin shrugged. Being a mage is really convenient. Once my baby Jaina has mastered it, I'll ask her to play with me. Lothar rolled his eyes. Did you have dinner last night? Of course. Why do you ask? I want to tell you that teleportation below the Breaking Dawn mage level is terrible. There's more than a 30% chance of dying halfway. Even if you succeed, it's very likely that you'll vomit everything you ate yesterday. Duque appeared in South Shore. The dazzling magical radiance alarmed many guards, and Makarov's son even ran over to greet him after waking up. Duque sighed slightly. When he gained more power, he immediately realized that his foundation was weak. If he sent a few people out, there would be no one to order him around. Van Cleef went to the Western Wilderness, Windsor went to Stratholme to be baptized, Makarov and Vanessa were still in Lordaeron. Itana, whose father was a clerk, was ordered around by Duque as an internal affairs officer, and Darnielle was still playing reconnaissance on the other side of the sea. Duke pondered if he should find an opportunity to recruit 2 more underlings to help him. At this time, the commander of the Griffin Legion, General Tom Seamus, rushed over with his guards. It's Duke Marcus. Your Naga said that you're rushing back and they want to go ashore. Lang had yet to return to South Shore and Bolvar had been transferred away. General Seamus became the temporary supreme commander here. He was very nervous, but when he saw Duque appear, he was obviously relieved. Oh, Vara, ask her to come over. Not long after, Vara came over with 2 burly male Naga. Master. Vara and the male Naga bowed together. Duque deliberately said in the Murloc language, "What's wrong? Are the Murlocs going to rebel?" "No, the old blind man and the other Murloc leaders have repeatedly asked to see you, Master, saying that there is a prophet who must see you. I can't suppress it. Because tens of thousands of Murlocs followed their request." "You can't suppress it." Duque was a little stunned. The Naga's suppression on the Murlocs was absolute. It was like a tiger could easily clean up a lamb. Duque touched his chin. This so-called prophet is a bit interesting. Sorry, I dare not be too forceful. After all, I have not yet recovered all the Naga forces on Hillsbrad Beach. Oh. It's a Naga clan called Thorns that is active in the east of South Shore. Without the help of the Murlocs, it will be difficult for the current Furious Scale clan to complete the Master's task. When saying this, Vara's body was trembling slightly. The longer she followed Duque, the more she found Duque's strength and unfathomable. Vara was not an unintelligent creature. On the contrary, it was because of her high intelligence that she could see Duque's status and power. In Vara's view, hundreds of thousands of humans, nearly 100,000 troops, and more than 100 warships here were all led by Duque. Duque's order that the Naga and Murlocs were allies must be obeyed by hundreds of thousands of people. If the Murlocs hurt humans for no reason, they would naturally be severely punished. But a few days ago, a Stormwind officer was in a bad mood. He scolded a male Naga as a monster and stabbed the Naga. As a result, Duque ordered the officer to be whipped 20 times in front of tens of thousands of people and Vara. Most humans accepted this, but they could not understand it. Only Vara's loyalty silently rose to full value. In Vara's eyes, Duque was a real human king. Vara bowed. "Master, I strongly suggest that we appease the Murlocs first and then deal with the Thorns Nagas. After all, the Thorns Nagas also have a considerable number of Murlocs under their command." Chapter 232. Which one is closer? I'm asking which one is closer, the spiny Naga or the Murloc prophet. We have to clean them up anyway, so let's go from the closest to the furthest. The Naga Siren priest's heart was suddenly in a mess. She finally realized the gap between her and her master. Her vision was still too low. In her mind, she was thinking about how to use the existing forces to suppress the opponent and expand the territory and the tribe. Her master was thinking about which one was closer. Sure enough, the difference in strength led to a different level of thinking. The spiny Naga is closer. Their leader is called Syphilis. Lead the way, Duque said simply. At this time, seeing Duque rushing back in the middle of the night and leaving with the Naga, Seamus could not calm down. There was no doubt that Duque was important to Stormwind, and now Duque's position was even more important. The deputy commander of the Lordaeron Alliance. This was a big man with independent military power, and a lift of his foot could shake the earth 3 times. It was no exaggeration to say that if something happened to Duque, at least half of Stormwind's dream of restoring the country would be shattered. Sir Marcus, are you leaving the camp? Well, there's something on the Naga side. Please be sure to wait until morning so that I can arrange guards for you. Duque waved his hand. I can't wait. South Shore may become the main target of the Horde's attack within 10 days. I must recover all the Naga and Murlocs here before that. General Seamus resolutely stopped in front of Duque, but he bowed deeply and lowered his head. Sir, please be aware of your status and importance. What you are shouldering now is not just your own dream, but the dream of restoring the country of nearly 1 million Storm citizens. If you insist on leaving at night, please be sure to bring enough guards. Duque was stunned. It's not that exaggerated, just some Murlocs and Naga. I'm an expert in this area. I can't let the heavy infantry of the Griffin Legion run to the beach with me in heavy armor and then swim. General Seamus raised his hand, and Duque found several groups of people nearby were coming. Not only were there guards wearing full leather armor holding short swords, hand crossbows and small round shields, there was also a large group of Marines. If he said that he wasn't prepared, he would be lying. Seamus took out a warrant. His Majesty Rin has ordered that Duke Marcus is an important minister of the country. Before he has enough powerful knights around him, no less than 100 guards are allowed to go out at any time. Duque laughed involuntarily. He almost wanted to reveal the fact that he could be resurrected. However, Duque still accepted it. This is just a relaxing hunt. All right, take your hammers and other blunt weapons and set off. Remember to be gentle when you smash him. I want him alive. At 3 o'clock in the morning, with 200 guards and nearly 100 Nagas, Duque and his team went along the eastern beach of South Shore. Fighting at night in this era was a very troublesome thing. In the darkness, not to mention the warriors below, even General Tom Seamus, who was in charge of being the captain of the guards, had an instinctive panic in his heart. He even doubted how much combat power his subordinates could exert once they were attacked. They were already strong soldiers if they didn't scatter in panic at the beginning. If the opponent was an orc, Duque would definitely not dare to court death. But such a low-level Naga. In the past 10,000 years, most Nagas had lived at the bottom of the sea, and their vision was different from that of humans. Their vision was more of perception, just like what humans called night vision. On the contrary, the strong light of noon would have a considerable impact on them. They arrived at the place after 20 minutes. It was a great bay. The concave harbor was surrounded on 3 sides by cliffs that could not be climbed except by expert rock climbers. The remaining side was a beach. Duque and the others almost dripped water when they went in. Alright, it's daybreak. Wake them up. Duque whistled. Seamus looked at the moon hanging high in the sky, and the muscles on his face trembled. 3 seconds later, the elite human soldiers who received the order began to shout, which easily alarmed the Nagas who were already extremely vigilant. A large number of Nagas rushed out of the caves under the cliffs, and of course, there were a small number of fishmen who were slaves. Duque noticed that the biggest difference between these guys and his angry and gray-scaled Nagas was that their arms and the fins on their backs were bright pink. Prepare for battle. General Seamus hadn't finished shouting. Duque shouted, close your eyes. Arcane fire magic circuit was fully activated. A huge fireball that was as bright as the noon sun jumped out of Duque's hand and flew at a high speed to a height of more than 30 meters before exploding. The violent flash was like an invisible wave sweeping across the battlefield. The spiny Nagas and their fishmen were all hit. The Nagas who were afraid of light and the fishmen with big eyes, all covered their eyes in pain, bent over or rolled on the ground. The enemies were all blind while their own side was full of energy. In such a state, the spiny Nagas and fishmen could not stop the organized and disciplined slavers under Duque. Although they had good combat power, they could not even exert 10% of their combat power. Moreover, in a blind state listening to the deafening roar in their ears, they became extremely flustered. Countless Nagas and fishmen waved their weapons in panic and even poked their own people. Some wanted to escape back to the cave, and some instinctively wanted to escape into the water in panic. The enemies were in chaos. Most of the enemies on land were taken care of by Seamus's men, and those who rushed to the shallow water were dealt with by 1/3 of the male Nagas sent by Vara. All the guys who were blinded were knocked down in just 3 minutes. The defeat of the large force outside in turn caused the Nagas who were still staying in the cave to waver. Even if the leader of the spiny Nagas repeatedly howled, calling the Nagas to counterattack, not many red-finned Nagas dared to come out. Even if they came out, they would be served by several human hammers. This kind of whack-a-mole fighting style was popular with most people, although they almost did not believe that all this was really happening. As Duque said, "This is just an easy hunt. It was not even a warm-up battle. Come on. Show your face." When Duque shot a fireball that could bend into the cave that was only 15 meters deep according to the system's scan, as the specially weakened fireball exploded, the blazing flame forced a female Naga priest with pink fins to roll out. 18 magicians' hands instantly subdued this Naga priest. Duque did not even look at her and directly threw her to Vara. "Teach your kind well. If they refuse to surrender, kill them." The red-finned Naga priest and Vara trembled at the same time. Chapter 233. The first rays of dawn appeared. It was another morning. Although everyone who stayed in South Shore knew that a war was about to break out, the increasing strength still gave the townspeople and the defenders a lot of confidence. Especially this morning, the Nagas who once occupied the entire eastern coastline of the town all came to the beach to be scolded by the veteran Naga wearing the emblem of the 100-handed reaper. No one could understand the Naga language, but it did not prevent them from seeing those red-finned Nagas wearing a pair of special scale pauldrons, which represented the identity of Duke Marcus's private soldiers. Oh, as expected of the Sea King. The Storm Army said so. At this time, Duque was waiting for the tide to recede. Originally, Duque wanted to go and deal with the Fishman Prophet early in the morning, but he was told that the guy was on an island near the southwest coast of South Shore. That place was quite troublesome with many submerged reefs. Even a small boat could easily be unlucky. If people wanted to go there, the best way was to wait for the tide to recede and directly pass through the exposed beach. If it was only Duque, then Duque would directly take the Nagas there. Unfortunately, General Xiamus was with him, so he could only wait until the tide receded at noon. Soon it was close to noon. Duque and his party waited for the tide to recede, crossed the rocky coast and came to an unnamed island. Damn, so many fishmen. There were fishmen in the sea, on the shore and on the shore. Usually the murlocs were in groups of 2s and 3s even on the beach. But now, Duke felt that the murlocs were denser than the poor fish in a can of sardines. They were like a bunch of ants squeezed together. Although it was not to the extent that a needle could not be inserted, at least it was absolutely impossible for a sampan to sail in. There were scales everywhere, huge fish-shaped bodies, big eyes and disproportionate ridiculous hands and feet everywhere. People with trypophobia were absolutely not suitable to see this scene. The arrival of Duque and his party caused a commotion. Vara tried to use the Naga's intimidation to seize control of these fishmen, but Vara failed again. Even though they were afraid and cowering, they never truly retreated or worshipped Walla. General Xiamus' scalp went numb. "Duke, I know that the murlocs play a very important role in your defense plan, but I still strongly suggest that you evacuate first. We should gather more troops to control this situation. For example, let the Stormwind Navy come." Before the formal transfer of command, the former Blood Sail battleship docked on the coast of South Shore was still under Duque's command. From a reliable point of view, Zimos was absolutely right. Duque didn't want to do that. He controlled the fishmen by relying on his immature coercion and deception. To put it bluntly, it was tyranny. Once the pressure built on the terrifying legend was broken, Duque would never be able to control these fishmen again. Even though the fishmen were all trash, they were still very useful when there were a lot of them. For example, when they used the ice ship to transport 50,000 elite soldiers last time, they didn't have the fishmen to pull the ship. Were they supposed to let the soldiers soak their lower bodies in the water and kick around? Humph! Duque snorted coldly, and the arcane circuit in his body suddenly accelerated its circulation. The noon sun in mid-October was still very strong, but under Duque's terrifying magic power, the surrounding temperature dropped sharply. Beep 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 beep. A series of explosions sounded, and in the distance of 100 meters in front of Duque to the shore of the island, a frozen road emitting a cold light was forming. The Murlocs screamed in horror and scattered to the left and right, lest they be sealed by the cold air. They instinctively sensed the existence of danger. In just a few seconds, a 5-meter-wide, 100-meter-long ice avenue reflecting the bright sunlight appeared in front of everyone. J.O. Naka, the Sea King has been added. The Murlocs screamed. They flinched and made way for a wider passage. Tom, you stay back a little. Duque ordered softly, and then proudly filled the king's avenue that was emitting ice. On the left was the furious scale Naga priest Wala holding a long sword. On the right was the spiny Naga priest Syphilis holding a spear. Originally, the Naga priest had the highest status among the Nagas. Now the Naga priests of the two clans were crowding around Duque like serving a secular king, which made the Murlocs who had not joined Duque more and more frightened. The two Murlocs from the western wilderness, Blind Old Man and Fish Spear, seemed to feel that something was wrong. These two guys actually rolled over and knelt on both sides of the ice avenue, trembling with fear. Get out! Duque snorted, and the arcane impact was released to the left and right at the same time. At once the two guys with weak willpower flew out while vomiting blood. But the two guys seemed to realize that Duque was stronger. Regardless of their injuries, they came over and knelt a little further away. I'll deal with you later, Duque said in the Murloc language. They came to the center of the island. Duque heard a voice with a mysterious rhythm. Gah, Murlocs are a great race. Duque was annoyed listening to it, so he simply let the system filter it and translated it directly. The thousands of Murlocs below all bowed down. The oracle is right. The Murlocs only obey the true king of the sea. All creatures that do not belong to the sea are not worthy to be the ruler of the Murlocs. Thousands of Murlocs knelt down again. The oracle is right. At this time, at the highest point of the island, standing on a huge pink clamshell, holding a staff like a dragon's claw holding a green crystal ball, a strange Murloc with a large number of water elements wrapped around his right hand pointed the staff at Duque, who had 72 hands of magic. So this human, Duque sneered. The system had completely locked on this so-called oracle who had bewitched his Murlocs and betrayed them. This oracle was very good. As a Murloc, especially in this Murloc race with low intelligence, it was absolutely a miracle that such a Murloc with the strength of a peak Sky Mage could be born. However, what Sky Mage in front of Duque was definitely not enough. No matter what the reason was, as long as this Murloc prophet said something against Duque's rule, then even if he had to kill all the Murlocs here, Duque would not be merciful. At this moment, Duque's magic circuit had already circulated at full speed. All the space passages connecting the elemental realm had already been opened. All the elements in the surrounding atmosphere had already crawled under Duque's feet, waiting for Duque's command at any time. At this moment the Murloc prophet's tongue seemed to be stuck. What am I, a human? Duque sneered. In his eyes the Murloc prophet was already a dead fish. Suddenly, this Murloc prophet who called himself the Oracle opened his glistening yellow eyes wide and suddenly pointed at Duque. Yes, that's right. He is the Murlocs who appear once in 10,000 years, the one who will lead us to dominate the coast and make the Murlocs even greater. The Murlocs below all knelt down to worship Duque and shouted in unison like a tsunami, "The prophet is right. Greetings, my king." What? That you're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.